A black maid daring to touch a millionaire's child? Officer Grant spat in front of the crowd. Adrian Cole clenched his fists, while Noah and Nora burst into tears in Selena Brooks's arms. Selena held her head high, her voice thundering. Children don't need power. They need love, and that's something you can't take away. This wasn't just a clash between wealth and prejudice. It was a reminder. Justice begins with arms that know how to protect. The Cole mansion glowed in the middle of the night, its glass windows reflecting pale yellow light, like a brightly lit fortress lost in the still darkness of the suburb. That lavish exterior couldn't hide the chaos inside. The piercing cries of the twins, Noah and Nora, echoed through the floors, bounced off the marble staircase, and slammed into the cold walls like an alarm tearing through the silence. The house staff exchanged nervous glances, everyone exhausted, no one daring to come closer. On the second floor, the bedroom door burst open as Adrian Cole appeared, his face gaunt, dark circles under his eyes, spreading like ink stains. He rushed into the room, voice strained, trying to rise above the relentless wailing. "Be quiet, you have to sleep." His commanding tone rang out, but instead of calming them, the children grew more terrified, their cries exploding louder. Noah rolled across the bed. Nora kicked off the blanket, both of them small like baby birds who'd lost their nest, desperately searching for something to cling to but finding no arms. Adrian collapsed onto the edge of the bed, his large hand trembling as it touched his son's shoulder, then dropped, because he had no idea what to do. A soft sigh came from the doorway. It was the old housekeeper, who had served the Cole family for decades, seen their extravagant parties and their moments of grief. Her eyes fell on Adrian, filled with pity and helplessness. She said gently, "Sir, maybe it's time to try." Her voice trailed off, knowing well that every time someone mentioned a caregiver, Adrian would lose his temper. But tonight, the mounting confusion had reached its breaking point. Without waiting for permission, she brought in a small figure who had been waiting in the hallway. Selena Brooks entered, her face calm, her eyes filled with determination. The room fell still for a moment. The only sound left was the children's sobs. Adrian looked up, his sharp gaze cutting like a blade, his voice low and laced with disdain. "What do you think you can do that others couldn't?" Selena said nothing. No excuses, no explanations. She walked toward the bed, each step steady, as if long familiar with the weight of skeptical stares. The children's eyes immediately followed her, a flicker of light dancing in their tearful gaze. She sat beside the bed, pulled a wooden chair close, and gently ran her fingers through Nora's messy hair. The room quieted. The only sound was Adrian's tense breathing behind her. Selena began to hum, her voice smooth like a nighttime stream weaving through stone. The lullaby held no grandeur, just the old tunes of a distant memory, but it was soft enough to carry the pain of the children far away. Noah stopped thrashing, his tiny body slowly relaxing, heavy eyelids falling shut. Nora nestled into Selena's hand, her sobs fading into quiet sniffles. The warm yellow light bathed their young faces as their eyes closed in peace. The entire room sank into silence. Adrian stood frozen, his chest rising and falling with a mix of anger and disbelief. He couldn't believe what he was seeing: two children who had left him helpless for 2 long years now lying quietly in the arms of a stranger. That gentle sound seemed to pierce through the cold shell he had built around himself since the day he lost his wife, and for a brief moment, his heart ached. Selena leaned down and placed a soft kiss on the children's foreheads, then gently pulled the blanket up to their chests. She lifted her head and met Adrian's eyes. In those eyes, pride and ice still lingered, but buried deep inside was a small flicker, shimmering as if it wanted to ignite, though even he couldn't admit it. "No way," Adrian muttered, his voice hoarse, like someone witnessing the impossible. He clenched his fists, but his palms were already damp with sweat. Everything he had believed in: money, power, absolute control, suddenly wavered, all because of a lullaby and a simple embrace. Outside the window, the night breeze passed through the trees, carrying the damp scent of a summer sky. Inside that luxurious house, for the first time since the tragedy, a fragile peace appeared, quiet, but more real than any promise. Adrian stood still, his chest pounding, while Selena remained silent, neither boasting nor seeking acknowledgement. She simply bowed her head and laid a gentle hand on the small sleeping shoulders, as if that alone were the one task life had given her. The grand room now felt small, filled with a quiet truth. A powerful millionaire had been powerless, and a woman once dismissed had brought something no one else could. And in that very moment, invisible threads began to tie their fates together, leading to a chain of events no one could have foreseen. Morning in the Cole mansion began with sunlight streaming through tall glass windows, casting a pale, cold glow across the marble floor. In contrast to the peaceful view outside, Adrian felt only heaviness inside. He sat at the long dining table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of him, barely touched. The only sound in the room was the soft clink of a spoon tapping the cup, each tap sharp and tense. Noah and Nora sat at the far end of the table, their bright eyes occasionally glancing toward Selena, who stood quietly in the corner, hands clasped together as if afraid to do something wrong. Adrian looked up, his cold stare fixed directly on her, and his voice came out low and dry. Last night was just luck. Don't think you have a place here. Each word fell like a thin blade, not loud, but enough to drop the room's temperature. Selena didn't react, didn't lower her head, or show weakness. She stood tall, her gaze calm. That silence irritated Adrian more. He frowned and tapped his fingers on the table, as if trying to shake off the image of his children sleeping peacefully in this woman's arm. Noah and Nora didn't fully understand their father's words, but they sensed the tension. They set down their utensils, slipped off their chairs, and walked quickly toward Selena. Their small hands clutched at the hem of her shirt, eyes innocent yet determined. "I want to stay with Miss Selena," Nora mumbled, her voice still thick with sleep. Noah nodded, his face more serious than usual. That scene felt like another blade cutting into Adrian's chest, choking him with the sense that he was being pushed out of his own children's tiny world. Adrian said nothing more, only gripped the handle of his coffee cup, eyes locked on the table. The heavy air was broken by the sound of the doorbell. The housekeeper rushed to open it, and when the wide doors swung open, two uniformed figures stepped in, as if they had every right to enter whenever they pleased. Officer Grant, tall and cold-eyed, and Doyle, with a constant smirk tugging at his lips, walked straight into the foyer. "We received a report of something suspicious in the area, and need to conduct a security check," Grant said, his voice deliberately loud, as if to make sure everyone in the house could hear. Adrian frowned and stood up. "Suspicious of what?" "This is my private home. No one may barge in without cause." But Grant had no intention of backing off. His eyes shifted toward Selena like a predator locking on its target. Doyle was more direct. He walked slowly toward Selena, squinted at her, then let out a sharp scoff. "A black nanny in a millionaire's house? Looks more like a break-in to me." The words landed heavy and bitter, echoing through the grand foyer like a slap to the face. Noah and Nora, still clinging to Selena, began to tremble, their eyes wide with fear. Selena placed her hands on their shoulders, gently pulling them behind her, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I work here," she said, calm but firm. "I was hired to care for these two children," Doyle snorted, his eyes sweeping over Adrian with disdain. "You sure about that? Letting someone like her stand next to your kids? How safe is that?" His words were both an open insult to Selena and a jab at Adrian's control in his own home. Adrian clenched his jaw, heat rushing to his face. He wanted to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He had never been good at confronting scorn, especially when it unfolded in front of the very children he was trying to protect. His silence only deepened the tension, like a rope stretched to the point where the slightest touch could snap it. Grant stepped in, his voice cold and sharp. "We'll be keeping an eye out, just to make sure nothing inside your home threatens public order. People say, anyone who looks out of place is bound to be trouble sooner or later." The tone was sweet, but each word carried the weight of a quiet threat. Selena turned to Adrian, a flicker of challenge flashing in her eyes. She knew he was torn between pride and the fear of social judgment. But in this moment, it was his silence that stabbed at the fragile trust she hoped to plant in the hearts of the children. "You've seen it for yourselves," she said evenly. "They need to be safe, and safety doesn't mean being judged by the color of their caregiver's skin." Doyle let out a harsh laugh like a razor's scrape, then turned and walked out with Grant. But before leaving, he glanced back and tossed out a final warning. "Just wait. People won't stay quiet about this strange little scene." The door slammed shut, the sound echoing down the long hallway. In the room, only Adrian's heavy breathing remained, his eyes burning with anger but not at the officers. His gaze landed on Selena. "You see?" he hissed. "Your presence here has made everything more complicated." Selena didn't respond. She simply bent down and wrapped the trembling children in her arms, whispering softly, "It's okay. Your dad is here, and so am I." Noah buried his face in her shoulder, and Nora clutched the edge of her shirt, as if they were the ones quietly choosing what came next. Adrian watched them, frustration and exhaustion boiling inside him. He wanted her gone that instant, yet the memory of the previous night returned like another blade, her gentle song, the calm in her eyes, and how the children had finally slept. The conflict twisted tight inside his chest, and he knew, from this moment on, his home would never be the same. The door slammed shut behind the two officers, but the echo of their mocking words still lingered in the air. Selena gently tightened her grip on Noah and Nora's shoulders, her eyes fixed on Adrian, the man standing rigid in the foyer with a darkened face. His breathing was heavy, clearly shaken by the officers' presence and the venom in their voices, which had cracked the proud shell he had worked so hard to maintain. The housekeeper quietly withdrew, leaving only Adrian, Selena, and the two children who clung to her, as if she were the only safe thing left in the vast, cold house. Adrian tried to push away the confusion, dragging his fingers down the bridge of his nose, as if forcing himself back into control. His voice came out hoarse, tight with restraint. "I don't need more chaos. They overreacted, but now it's time to leave. Let this house be." He spoke as though to the empty space, attempting to erase the intrusion of the police, but also to bury the unrest swelling in his chest. Grant had not yet fully left. He stood turned halfway, eyes gliding across Selena, his voice drawn out, each word like a dull blade slicing pride. Just a warning. People like her usually cause trouble. The entire foyer fell silent, save for the pounding of Selena's heart in her chest. She took a deep breath, held her spine straight, and let her eyes shine with unshakable pride. People like me? You mean the color of my skin? Selena's voice was steady, not loud, not weak, but clear enough for every word to reach Adrian and ripple through the heavy air. Her defiance was not a shout, but a cold challenge that made the already stifling atmosphere even tighter. Noah looked up at her, admiration and fear mixing in his eyes, while Nora gripped Selena's hand, feeling her own small fingers tremble. Adrian heard it, and his heart jolted as if struck at its most vulnerable point. He spun around, his eyes tense, trying to hold back the storm rising inside. Enough, he snapped, as if trying to cut everything off at once. The word echoed sharply, shaking the air, yet in his eyes, confusion stood out more than anything. Adrian wasn't trying to silence Selena entirely, nor was he defending the officers. He was a man caught between two edges, unsure which side to step toward. Grant narrowed his eyes, a faint smirk curling at the corner of his mouth before he turned away. Doyle sneered in return, his heavy steps pounding the floor deliberately, each one leaving behind the sting of contempt. The door closed once again, this time quieter, but inside, everyone remained shaken by a sound that refused to fade. Selena let go of the children's shoulders and stood upright, her gaze still marked by fierce resolve. She turned and looked directly at Adrian. Only a few steps stood between them, yet it felt like a deep chasm. "You think I'm trouble," she said, her voice calm but every word carrying weight. "But I'm not someone you or anyone else gets to insult, especially not in front of these children." Adrian clenched his jaw, his eyes flashing like a spark held back too long. He wanted to argue, to assert his authority, but the image of last night suddenly rushed in the gentle singing that lulled his children to sleep, the soft movement of their small shoulders as they finally found peace. That image pressed on him like a quiet reminder, stopping the words that usually came so easily. Nora, still tucked behind Selena, suddenly spoke, her childlike voice trembling. "Miss Selena helped me fall asleep. Mom used to sing like that too." The innocent sentence fell softly, but it squeezed Adrian's heart with brutal force. He froze, eyes reddening, and quickly turned away before anyone could catch his moment of weakness. Adrian moved toward the tall window, staring out at the garden glowing under the morning sun, but his mind was tangled. Images of his late wife filled his head, her gentle smile, the lullabies that once carried the children into sleep. It had been so long since the accident took her away, so long since this house had heard any lullaby. And now, a stranger had done what he thought no one ever could again. Selena didn't come any closer. She knew she had reached the most fragile place in this man's heart. She bent down and gently took Noah and Nora by the hand, her voice soft like water running through stone. "Come on, it's late. Let's rest a bit. Give your dad some time." The words were simple, but they left a quiet echo across the wide, empty room. As she walked away, Selena looked up and caught a fleeting glance from Adrian. In that brief moment, she saw the inner struggle, the confusion, and a pain that had never been healed. It was only a second, but enough for Selena to understand that the fragile connection just formed between them would lead to more encounters, sharper, more intense, and no less painful. Adrian remained standing in the middle of the room, his chest rising and falling. Questions pounded in his mind. Had he made a mistake letting a stranger step into the already wounded life of his family? But the image of his children clinging to Selena, finding comfort in her, made it impossible for him to deny a simple truth. Her presence had altered the rhythm of this house, whether he wanted it or not. The sky outside was clear, but inside Adrian, the clouds were thickening. He knew this was only the beginning of a storm-filled journey, where prejudice, division, and the ache of loss would twist into trials he could not yet predict. And in the eye of that storm, Adrian understood he could no longer hide, because even in his children's eyes, the truth was already visible. Selena Brooks had entered their lives, bringing with her a change that could not be undone. Night fell over the Cole mansion in an unusual silence, but that peace didn't last long. Just as the clock ticked past midnight, the cries of Noah and Nora rang out, tearing through the night and echoing off the cold stone walls. Their cries were persistent, wrenching, as if carrying some nameless fear. The house staff woke with a jolt, exchanging uneasy glances before avoiding the eyes of their employer. They had grown used to these long, tense nights, yet the helplessness they felt watching the children thrash through restless sleep never became any easier. Adrian stood by the bedroom door, his shadow stretching across the wooden floor, his hand gripping the doorknob as if he might rip it off, though he couldn't bring himself to step inside. His eyes held exhaustion and a deep, hidden unease. He remembered well the nights after the accident, when the children would wake, crying, their eyes wet, calling out for "Mommy," while he stood frozen, unable to do anything but order them to be quiet. He had tried everything from child therapists to modern sleep therapies, but nothing worked. Now, not even wealth or power could quiet his children's cries. The door opened, and Selena stepped in with a calm presence. Last night had left her with many thoughts, but her eyes now held unwavering resolve. She said nothing, didn't ask for Adrian's permission, and simply walked to where the children were twisting in their nightmares. Noah flailed, Nora kicked, sweat glistening on their tiny foreheads. Selena leaned down and wrapped them both in her arms. Her voice rose gently, each word flowing through the darkness like a stream. "You are allowed to dream beautiful dreams." Noah stopped struggling, his frantic breathing slowing. Nora nestled into her chest, her cries fading into soft, scattered sobs. Selena didn't rush to lay them down. She let their small bodies rest fully against her, letting them draw strength from the warmth of a steady embrace. In that room, weighed down by shadows and memories, her presence was like a faint light, just enough to chase off the fears that had wrapped themselves around the children's fragile souls. Adrian stood in the hallway, frozen. Somehow, a glass of wine had found its way into his hand, the liquid inside catching the glow of the hallway light. His eyes locked on the scene before him, his mind drifting into a distant memory. He remembered the days when everything was whole, when his wife sat in that very chair, holding the children close and singing lullabies. He used to stand nearby, never paying attention to the words, assuming it was just a mother's duty. Then, one rainy afternoon, the accident took everything. From that day on, the house had gone silent, no songs, no warmth. Now, in this very moment, the image of Selena holding his children brought back all the memories he had buried deep. But at the same time, a strange anger rose within him, as if her presence were trespassing on something sacred, the memory of his late wife. He tightened his grip on the wine glass, veins rising in his hand as the liquid sloshed over the rim and dripped onto the floor. His breath trembled, his throat tightened. "You just did something unbelievable," Adrian whispered, his voice shaking beyond control. The words were not praise, nor denial, but more like a quiet admission of a truth he could no longer reject. Selena had done what he, despite all his power and wealth, could not. Selena did not turn around. She seemed to know Adrian was standing there, but she didn't need his acknowledgement. She focused solely on the slowly closing eyes of Noah and Nora, watching their tiny faces settle into calm. Their breathing evened out, small fingers still gently clutching her shirt, as if unwilling to let go. A thin sheen of sweat remained on their cheeks, catching the light like morning dew. In that silence, Adrian felt a sharp realization. His children had found something to hold on to, and it wasn't him. For too long, he had relied on control, on commands to mask his helplessness, forgetting that what they truly needed was a pair of arms willing to share their pain. The scene before him made him feel jealous, guilty, and somehow punished. He stepped slowly closer, stopping at the threshold. The wine glass in his hand was now more than half empty, but he tasted no bitterness from the drink, only the choking kind that came from within. His heart clenched. As he finally faced it, the loss had closed him off, and that very closing had left wounds in his children's hearts. Selena leaned down and whispered once more, "Sleep now, little angels. You're safe here." Her voice was soft as breath, yet it was enough to guide the children into sleep. The room suddenly felt warm, not from heat, but from something Adrian thought had been lost forever. He stepped back, leaned against the wall, and closed his eyes. Inside his mind, two conflicting thoughts pulled at him, one telling him to cast Selena out, to protect the memory of his late wife, the other admitting that she had brought back a warmth he could not. Inside the room, Selena still sat quietly, like a shadow, but in that silence lay a quiet strength. It was not born of wealth or power, but from a heart that knew how to feel another's pain. And that was what allowed the children to find peace. The night stretched on, but for the first time in years, the Cole mansion did not echo with cries. Only the steady breaths of sleeping children remained, the soft lullaby fading into the air, and the heavy breathing of a father trying to find his way back to himself. A simple night, but enough to mark an irreversible turning point. The weekend morning opened with a rare warmth, the sun casting soft light over a city still drying from endless days of rain. Adrian decided to take Noah and Nora to the city's large park, partly to let them enjoy the fresh air, partly to escape the heavy thoughts that had weighed him down. It had been a long time since he agreed to go out in public with his children, as the scrutiny of the world and its judgmental eyes always unsettled him. But Noah and Nora had begged him all week, and in the end, he couldn't say no. Selena came along, quietly carrying a small basket with water and tissues, moving with the natural ease of someone who had grown used to being by the children's side. The park was full of people, laugh, and chatter ringing through the air, children running everywhere. Noah and Nora looked around with wide, sparkling eyes, occasionally turning to Selena as if to make sure she was still nearby. She smiled, gently patting their heads, while Adrian kept his distance, watching with a stern expression, as if trying to maintain an image of detachment. They stopped near a wide patch of grass, where an old swing creaked under the shade of a tree. Noah tugged Nora's hand, and the two ran toward it, climbing on together. Selena sat nearby, keeping watch, occasionally reaching out to give them a gentle push. Their laughter rang out, light and clear, blending into the breeze. It was an ordinary scene for most families, but for Adrian, it was something rare, a moment where his children were truly happy. That joy didn't last. From a distance, two uniformed figures approached. Grant and Doyle, faces Adrian knew all too well, appeared like gray clouds blotting out a blue sky. They walked up with wide, forced smiles, eyes flicking past Adrian before landing with sharp focus on Selena sitting beside the children. "Excuse me," Grant began, dragging out his words for effect. "We're on patrol. These two kids, are they yours?" His voice was loud enough for nearby parkgoers to turn and look. Selena froze, her chest tightening as if an invisible hand had clamped down. But in a breath, she regained control. Her voice came out steady and firm. "They're my employer's children." The answer didn't waver, but her hands clenched on the back of the bench, knowing full well the question wasn't innocent. Doyle let out a loud laugh, echoing across the open space, grating and mocking. He stepped closer, his eyes sliding over Selena with open disdain and challenge. "A black woman holding the Cole kids? People might think you're kidnapping them." His voice was triumphant, like someone who had just found the perfect weakness to expose. The air around them shifted immediately. Curious stares from passing families turned their way, some whispering, others pausing to watch. Noah stopped laughing, his eyes wide with confusion. Nora gripped Selena's shirt tightly, her lips trembling. Adrian stood frozen, his face tense, fists clenched at his sides. He felt the insult crash over him like poison, seeping into every crack of pride he had left. Selena took a deep breath, her eyes locked on Doyle, and her voice rose not loud, but clear enough to hush the noise around them. "What exactly are you implying? I'm here doing my job, taking care of these children as I'm supposed to. And you, what right do you have to smear my name in front of them?" Her words came sharp and direct, drawing a few startled gasps from the surrounding crowd. Doyle raised an eyebrow, arms crossed, that smug smile still on his face. "Right? The right of someone who upholds the law and prevents trouble. And believe me, this scene doesn't look normal." He turned deliberately to the crowd. "A black woman holding rich white kids. If nothing shady's going on, that's what's strange." Murmurs spread. Some people looked at Selena with suspicion, and others shook their heads, irritated by the blatant absurdity. Noah suddenly blurted out, his small voice breaking, "She didn't take us. She sings us to sleep. She's nice." Nora burst into tears, clinging tighter to Selena, making the air around them even heavier. Adrian stepped forward, his shoulders trembling, eyes burning with fury. He growled, his words hard and precise. "That's enough. These children are mine. She is their nanny. No one has the right to humiliate her like that." His voice echoed, firm and commanding, causing Grant to take a slight step back, while Doyle let out a dry laugh, though his eyes flashed with spite. Grant patted his partner's shoulder, pulling him away, but not without a parting jab. "We're just giving a reminder. Some people never quite fit. And those kinds of people, they always cause trouble eventually." They walked off, leaving behind a choking silence. Selena knelt down and held Noah and Nora close, her voice softening. "It's okay. I'm here. No one's going to hurt you." The words were gentle, but the strength inside them was enough to calm the children. Adrian watched, heart stinging and burning, all at once. He saw the truth as clearly as the sun above them. The real threat wasn't the woman holding his children with love, it was the cruelty of prejudice itself. He turned away, eyes drifting to the far edge of the park, where golden sunlight still poured across the lush green grass. But inside him, the anger hadn't left. It coiled, a quiet flame smoldering in his chest, promising to burn hotter in the days to come. And he knew this confrontation was only the beginning. The park, once filled with children's laughter and the rustling of leaves in the wind, suddenly tightened like a stretched string. All eyes turned toward Adrian, Selena, and the two officers. Doyle's mocking laugh still lingered, drawing curious onlookers closer, and a few phones had already been raised, quietly recording. Adrian clenched his fists, his breath heavy with pressure, then his voice came out, each word clipped, firm, and burning with fury. "Enough. These are my children. She works for me." The statement cut through the air, prompting a few nearby heads to nod, but Grant stepped forward immediately, his eyes icy, lips curling in a cold smirk. "You think money buys the truth?" His voice was sharp as a blade, laced with open contempt. The question wasn't just an attack on Selena, it struck directly at Adrian's pride, challenging him publicly in front of the crowd. Noah and Nora pressed tightly against Selena, their teary eyes wide, small hands clutching her shirt like it was the only safe place left. Selena moved half a step forward, placing herself between the children and the officers. Her face showed no fear, on the contrary, Her eyes lit up with unwavering resolve. "Don't humiliate me in front of them," she said, voice steady, each word ringing out like a bell. The sentence wasn't loud, but its weight silenced the entire playground for a moment. Doyle burst out laughing, the harsh sound echoing across the open space. But right then, a bystander nearby lifted a phone and pressed record. The frame shook slightly, but the audio came through clearly, capturing the moment Selena spoke again, her voice strong and unshaken. "Crime is not in the color of skin. Crime is in those who wear a uniform and forget justice." Her words hit like thunder, freezing several witnesses in place. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some casting doubtful glances at the officers, others nodding quietly at the courage of a woman standing in the center of injustice. Adrian froze, too, his eyes briefly lighting up. In that instant, he no longer saw just a nanny. He saw someone willing to stand tall against humiliation and abuse. Grant's jaw tightened, his face flushed red, but he didn't answer right away. Doyle lowered his voice, leaning in to whisper in his partner's ear. "Let these bastards think we don't need to shout, just plant the doubt." Then he turned to the crowd, forcing a half smile. "Don't misunderstand us, folks, we're just doing our job." But the confidence in his tone had faded, drowned out by the echo of Selena's words. Noah suddenly looked up at Selena and softly said, his child's voice clear and steady, "She protects us." Nora nodded firmly, a tear still clinging to the corner of her eye. That small voice tightened something in Adrian's chest. He realized that his own children understood exactly who was truly standing with them, something he had blindly ignored for far too long. A breeze passed through, lifting some of the heaviness, but it couldn't clear the tension. The crowd had not dispersed. A few phones still recorded. Adrian took a deep breath, stepped forward, and stood beside Selena and the children. For the first time, he did not hide his anger. "These children are not objects for anyone to question. If either of you dares to insult them again, I won't stay silent." His voice lowered, steady and powerful, enough to make Grant pause. Selena felt the unexpected support from Adrian, but she didn't turn to him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the two officers, calm yet proud. Inside her, an old pain was rising, the memory of her younger brother being dragged away without cause, simply for sharing her skin. But this time, she wouldn't let that pain repeat itself in front of these innocent children. The murmurs among the crowd grew louder. Some whispered, "They're right. You can't equate skin color with crime." A middle-aged woman shook her head and muttered, "What kind of police talk like that? Shame on the badge." The voices were quiet, but enough to rattle Grant and Doyle. They exchanged glances, then quickly turned and walked away, leaving behind a mess of emotion in the air. Adrian watched as the two officers disappeared from view, a storm rising inside him. Never before had he felt the limits of power so clearly. Selena's presence was like a mirror, forcing him to confront who he had become. She had taken every insult in his place, and spoken the words that, deep down, he knew should have come from him. Selena bent down, holding Noah and Nora close, gently soothing them back to calm. The children slowly stopped crying, a hint of peace returning to their faces. That image etched itself into Adrian's mind, leaving him breathless with emotion. He knew this moment, whether by accident or intent, had been witnessed by an entire crowd, and through those phones, could soon spread far and wide. But above all, what shook him most was the undeniable truth. The woman being scorned was the one protecting his children, both in body and in spirit. He stood silently for a long time, then spoke in a low but steady voice, meant only for Selena to hear, "I won't let them do that in front of my children again." Selena tilted her head slightly, a flicker in her eyes, but she didn't reply. It wasn't a full promise yet, but it was the first sign that this man was beginning to shift. The sun had started to dip westward, casting golden-orange light across the park, painting the grass around them in glowing color. In that light, Adrian, Selena, and the children formed a small circle, standing together against a world filled with judgment. And within that fragile circle, a flicker of warmth began to glow, faint but defiant in the face of the cold pressing in from all sides. Within hours, the video from the park began circulating on social media. At first, it was shared in small groups and local news pages known for covering everyday incidents, but the intensity of the footage turned it into a storm. The scene was unmistakable. Two uniformed officers, faces twisted in mockery, standing before a small black woman shielding two children, with a wealthy man in the background, his posture tense, temple veins bulging. The audio was clear and impossible to ignore. "Crime is not in the color of skin. Crime is in those who wear a uniform and forget justice." Selena's voice rang sharp, decisive, pulling viewers straight into the moment. The video's title was designed for impact: "Police Humiliate Black Nanny of Millionaire." Within hours, viewership climbed into the hundreds of thousands, then quickly passed the million mark. Comments poured in like a flood, some expressing sympathy, others furious condemnation, and plenty offering cruel mockery or biting sarcasm. This is shameful. Cops talking like thugs. She's brave, standing tall against power. Is it even real? Looks staged for sympathy. Of course, black folks always stir up trouble for attention. The divide was sharp, like two cliffs facing each other, and in the middle stood the image of Adrian Cole, caught in the eye of the storm. Stills from the video spread across forums. A man in a tailored suit, face twisted in anger, beside a black nanny shielding his children. Captions were added in all kinds of tones. Millionaire and nanny who's really brave. Can money protect dignity? Adrian sat in his study, his laptop open to the news site, endless links blinking. He clicked on one, and the video loaded instantly. His heart pounded, hand lowering the wine glass without noticing the liquid spilling over the rim. He read the comments, eyes lingering on the mocking ones, each word pricking at his pride like a needle. This is the Cole estate, a so-called empire where the boss can't even control his nanny or the narrative? He stayed silent while she spoke, cowardly. Adrian slammed the laptop shut, the sound hitting the room like a weight. He stood, walked quickly to the window, breathing deeply, but the air caught in his throat. Rage and humiliation wrapped around him like fire, licking his nerves. He had always believed he could control everything, that wealth and reputation could shield him from scandal, but this time, it had slipped beyond his grasp. The video didn't just call out the police, it turned him into a target, a powerless rich father, exposed in harsh contrast beside a courageous black woman. While Adrian was lost in his anger, small footsteps echoed behind him. Nora timidly stepped into the room, holding a faded doll in her hand. Her eyes were clear, but filled with something Adrian didn't expect. She gently tugged on the hem of his shirt, looked up, and whispered, "Daddy, Miss Selena is nice like Mommy." The words hit Adrian like a blade straight to the chest. He froze, eyes unfocused, lips moving but unable to form a response. He wanted to protest, to say no one could ever replace their mother, that the memory of his late wife was sacred and untouchable. But looking into Nora's innocent eyes, untouched by the world's weight, he couldn't lie. She wasn't comparing, nor replacing, she had simply found the warmth she'd been missing. And in a child's heart, truth was always painfully simple. Noah peeked around the hallway corner, his voice bright. "Daddy, she holds us. We feel safe." Then both children ran off to their room, leaving Adrian standing still, hand trembling as it touched his chest. He felt as though the world had collapsed around him, not because of the video or the vicious comments, but because his daughter had spoken the truth he'd refused to face. He slowly walked back to his desk and sank into the chair. His eyes drifted over stacks of investment documents and contracts worth millions of dollars. All the things that once symbolized power and control now felt hollow, meaningless beside Nora's innocent words. "Miss Selena is nice like Mommy." 4 simple words that shook Adrian's heart to the core. He poured another glass of wine, but when he raised it to his lips, his hand stopped mid-air. In the mirror on the wall, he saw a worn-down man, his face etched with sleepless lines, his eyes bloodshot. That wasn't the image of a father his children could trust, and he hated what he saw. Across the city, in a small staff room, Selena sat holding her phone as it buzzed non-stop with messages and notifications. She saw the video spreading, read through hundreds of comments. Some called her a quiet hero. Others accused her of acting for attention. She set the phone down and took a deep breath. She didn't seek praise, nor did she fear criticism. The only thing on her mind was Noah and Nora. Would they be affected by the venom being hurled online? She knew this storm wasn't hitting her alone, it was pulling 2 innocent children into its wake. At night, as she tucked the children into bed, Selena saw Adrian standing silently at the door, his face cast in shadow. He didn't step inside, just watched. His gaze was complex, holding both caution and a flicker of something softer. Selena understood he wasn't ready to speak, nor strong enough to confront anything yet. But the fact that he stood there in silence, watching, was already a change from the days before. That whole night, Adrian didn't sleep. Nora's whisper echoed in his ears. "Miss Selena is nice like Mommy." He thought of his late wife, her laughter, the warmth of her hugs now long gone. He realized what hurt wasn't the comparison. It was the truth that his children no longer looked to him for that warmth. The pain of losing his wife had turned him into a wall, and it was he who had pushed his children away. By the time morning light crept in, Adrian was still sitting there, mind tangled. He knew the video would continue spreading, and the public would keep dissecting it. But what haunted him more than any scandal was his daughter's innocent words, a sentence strong enough to shake the wall of pride he had built over the past 2 years. He sat frozen, one hand pressed to his chest, unable to offer any response, knowing that at this point, no excuse would matter. And in that stillness, a thought he had never considered before began to form. Maybe it was time he learned to listen, instead of just giving orders. Adrian sat in his study, desk lamp casting light over towering stacks of paperwork. On his computer screen were countless articles, links, and digital records opened after hours of searching. He didn't believe in silence, and he couldn't stand the thought that something unknown existed inside his own home. Selena had appeared too suddenly, and though his heart was beginning to shift, his mind pushed him to verify everything. A woman who could stir up public opinion, who could earn his children's absolute trust, could not be simple. At last, Adrian stopped at a name that made him freeze. Future Steps. The file was clear, a non-profit community group founded 6 years ago, aiming to help underprivileged black children learn music and develop their talents. A photo loaded on the screen showed a modest room, a few worn pianos and violins, children with bright eyes sitting beside a younger Selena, her smile full of determination. Adrian leaned closer, his eyes drawn to the look captured in the frame. This woman was not a nanny, not just someone who sang lullabies, she was a guide, a quiet leader. Then the next file made his heart sink. A report from 3 years ago documented a music class being raided by police, with Selena arrested mid-lesson. The charge was stated plainly, disturbing the peace, unauthorized gathering. Adrian frowned, flipping through more pages, and found 2 familiar names, Grant and Doyle. His chest tightened, each line of text hitting like a hammer. So the conflict between Selena and the officers hadn't just begun, it had history. He leaned back in his chair, hands clasped tightly. A flood of questions raced through his mind. Why hadn't she told him? Why walk into his home and say nothing about this past? Was she hiding something? Frustration rose, tangled with confusion he couldn't name. His feet moved on their own, carrying him down the long hallway to the staff quarters. The door was ajar, warm yellow light spilling out. Selena sat there, a fairy tale book in her hands, eyes focused as if trying to fill the quiet after a long, tiring day. Adrian stopped at the door, his shadow stretching across the floor, his voice low and rough, heavy with restraint. Why did you hide it from me? Selena looked up, her deep, dark eyes locking onto his. There was no hesitation, no denial. She closed the book, her voice calm and sharp like a blade sliding clean. Because you never believe. The answer stopped. Adrian cold, a sharp pain tightening in his chest, as if someone had just punched him straight through the ribs. He wanted to argue, to shout that he had the right to know, that he was the one in control of this house. But when he looked into her eyes, eyes that held no fear, only exhaustion and honesty, every word stuck in his throat. He realized she was right. Since the moment he met her, he had never truly listened. He had only judged, only doubted. If she had told him earlier, he would have used it against her, labeled it a flaw. Selena stood, walked toward the window, where moonlight slipped through, casting a pale glow across her face. Her voice rose soft but full of weight. I'm not looking for pity. I do what I believe is right. Future Steps was a hope for many children, but it was crushed. I don't want that past used as a reason to judge who I am now. Adrian stood still. In his head, the laughter of Grant and Doyle at the park echoed back, their shameless insults ringing louder now, and the truth came into focus. They had destroyed the dreams of children and labeled it disturbing the peace. His chest tightened, anger rising in a steady burn, but alongside it came a sense of helplessness, the bitter awareness that he had only arrived late, an outsider who never endured it, never understood. Selena turned slightly, looked at him, then walked past, leaving behind a silence that thickened the room. The door closed behind her, and Adrian was left standing alone in the dim light. He stumbled back to the desk, poured more wine, but this time, the burn in his throat offered no comfort. He slammed the glass down, the splash spreading across the table in a dark, spreading stain. That night, Adrian didn't sleep. He sat by the window, eyes staring out into the darkness over the garden. In his ears, her words echoed still, because you never believe. Each word like a blade, slicing through the shell of pride he always wore. He thought of every time he'd yelled at his children to be quiet, every cold glance at Selena, every silence he kept when police spewed insults in front of him. The truth was, he had never believed, never stepped forward, never protected. Noah and Nora slept soundly in their room, peaceful after being sung to sleep by Selena. But in the study, Adrian wrestled with himself. He thought of his wife, of the promise he once whispered at her hospital bedside, protect them with all your heart. And yet he had turned that promise into rigid commands, furrowed brows, and cold distance. Now, Selena's presence didn't just unsteady him, it forced him to look in the mirror and see a brutal truth. He had abandoned his children, abandoned trust, and abandoned the love he was meant to protect. As dawn broke faintly outside, Adrian's eyes were still bloodshot. He hadn't figured out how to move forward, but inside him, a seed had been planted, a seed of doubt in himself. Selena's words were not an accusation, but a reflection. And that reflection had made Adrian Cole, the man who once believed he controlled everything, realize for the first time that he was lost in his own home. The night sky cast a sheet of white rain over the city, lightning slashing across and thunder crashing so loudly it shook the entire Cole estate. The wide glass windows caught every flash of light before plunging back into heavy darkness. Cold wind swept through the long hallway, the wall sconces flickering as if trembling in fear of nature's wrath. The storm seemed intent on sweeping everything away. But inside the house, another storm was rising, fiercer and closer to the heart. In the second-floor bedroom, Noah burned with fever, his face flushed, sweat pouring from his forehead. He tossed and turned, breathing in sharp gasps, lips cracked and dry. Beside him, Nora screamed, her sobs mixing with the thunder, tiny hands clutching the blanket, eyes wide in terror. Adrian rushed in, frantic, heart pounding. He tried placing a cold towel on Noah's forehead, but his hands trembled so badly the towel fell. He picked Nora up, but she cried harder, her voice hoarse. Panic closed in on him like a shroud of darkness with no escape. He shouted for the butler, called the private nurse. But outside, the rain poured down heavier, streets were blocked, and the doctor reported it would take an hour to arrive. 1 hour, with a child burning in fever and another screaming in fear, felt like a bottomless chasm. Adrian spun in circles, chest tight, shirt soaked in cold sweat. Another thunderclap boomed. Lightning flashed across his face, pale, desperate. In the middle of the chaos, Selena appeared at the doorway. She stepped in, neither rushing nor panicked, but with eyes that glowed with fierce focus. She placed a small medicine kit on the table, shrugged off her rain-soaked coat, and moved to Noah's bed. With steady hands, she picked up a clean towel, soaked it in cool water, and gently wiped his forehead. Noah's breath still came in gasps, but under Selena's touch, it slowly steadied. "We have to bring the fever down now," Selena said firmly, eyes fixed on Noah. She wrung the towel, placed it back on his forehead, then reached for a bowl of water, wiping down his arms and legs. Nora still cried, shoulders trembling, but Selena quickly pulled her close, held her tight. "Listen to me, it's okay, it's just a fever. Your brother will be fine," she whispered, her voice calm and soft like a lullaby. Her hand patted Nora's back in a steady rhythm, as if her heartbeat could pass straight into the child's body to soothe her. Adrian stood frozen, staring at the scene. He had thought Selena was just someone who sang lullabies. He never imagined her as a seasoned caregiver, handling a medical emergency. She gave short, clear instructions to the butler: warm water, thermometer, light blanket. Every movement was swift, precise. There was no hesitation, no sign of fear. Noah panted, but let out a soft whimper, his head leaning into Selena's hand as if seeking refuge. The thermometer pointed to the red line, signaling a high fever. Yet Selena remained calm. She replaced the towel again and again, wiping steadily, each motion of her hand wrapping around the pain and easing the burning heat. Nora, in her arms, slowly stopped crying, her sobs broken and fading, her head resting on Selena's shoulder. Adrian staggered back, leaning against the wall, his chest heavy. He had spent his life managing billions, making decisions that affected thousands. Yet here he stood helpless, watching a woman do everything he could not. He wanted to step forward, to help somehow, but his legs felt weighed down. In the flash of lightning, he saw Selena's eyes, clearly not a trace of blame, no disdain, only pure focus on the children. That sight made his heart tremble, a sharp sting of shame cutting through. Time passed slowly under the weight of the pouring rain outside. Noah's temperature gradually dropped, and his breathing steadied. Selena laid him down gently, then adjusted Nora's blanket. The two children drifted into exhausted sleep, their faces relaxed, no longer twisted in pain. The room warmed again, even as the storm outside continued to rage. Adrian sank into the chair near the bed, covering his face with both hands. He felt small, insignificant next to Selena's steadiness. After a long while, as the thunder outside softened, he looked up. His eyes landed on Selena, bent over Noah, adjusting the towel on his forehead. His voice broke out, hoarse and shaking. "I was wrong. I kept doubting the one who saved my child." Selena paused slightly, her hand still resting on the boy's forehead, but she didn't turn right away. She heard the confession, the crack in his voice, the rawness of a man who had once stood proud, now admitting defeat. At last, she gave a small nod, her gaze still soft, still fixed on the two sleeping children. Adrian watched her, and for the first time in years, he felt a slight lift in his chest. But with it came a deep fear. If Selena left, would he be strong enough to face the storms, the endless nights, the weakness within himself? That question haunted him, tormented him, like thunder that never truly faded. The stormy night ended, but its echo left an indelible mark on Adrian Cole's heart. That night, the grand hall of the luxury hotel hosting the Charity Gala sparkled under crystal chandeliers. Soft symphonic music floated through the room, blending with clinking glasses and lively conversation. Adrian Cole stood at the center of a circle of business elites and politicians, his perfectly tailored suit concealing his fatigue, his face fixed in a polite smile. He spoke, shook hands, and responded to compliments, but his eyes kept drifting toward his two children being led by Selena to a quieter corner of the hall. He knew he couldn't afford a single misstep at an event filled with power players. Every gesture of his would be scrutinized. Noah and Nora, unaccustomed to crowded places, grew uneasy under the bright lights and constant noise. Within an hour, their giggles faded into frowns and whining. Nora buried her face into Selena's shoulder, while Noah tugged at her dress, mumbling repeatedly that he wanted to go home. Selena bent down to soothe them, her eyes flashing concern as she noticed a few guests casting curious glances their way. With no better option, she picked up both children and made her way through the hall, hoping to find a quieter spot to settle them. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Whispered comments rose. Fans fluttered faintly in the hands of women watching the scene as if it were a breach of decorum. Selena walked slowly, gently calming the two children in her arms, her face calm, her eyes unwavering. The lights shone down, casting a spotlight on the image of a black woman holding the children of millionaire Cole, a striking portrait against a backdrop of silk and opulence. Adrian caught sight of it and froze mid-conversation with a business partner. A tightness gripped him as he sensed the growing number of stares aimed at Selena and at his family. A few guests whispered, stifling smug grins, and others shook their heads disapprovingly. Adrian wanted to move toward them, but his feet felt rooted to the ground, because he knew he was at a crossroads, either maintain the mask of indifference, or make it clear where he stood with her. Selena held the children close, Nora sobbed hiccups, and Noah rubbed his eyes, red and watery. Their cries rose above the background of classical music, creating a sharp contrast. Selena ignored the stares, focused solely on the children's strained breaths, whispering quiet reassurances. Her figure, both fragile and fierce, made a few guests pause, their expressions shifting with quiet doubt. Adrian took a deep breath, trying to maintain his smile as he shook a few more hands, but his chest burned. He knew that with every passing minute of this gala, his name was being dissected alongside Selena's every step. But when his eyes landed on Nora's trembling shoulders and Noah's tear-streaked face, the pride of a billionaire businessman suddenly meant nothing. He had to move, had to do something he never imagined he would. Under the dazzling lights, tension spread across the grand hall. Whispers blended with the clinking of silver and glass, creating a suffocating atmosphere. Selena continued gently comforting the children, but it was her very silence that drew every eye in the room. Adrian saw it clearly, and in that moment, he realized he was facing a challenge far greater than any deal he had ever made. Grant and Doyle entered the hall with deliberate swagger, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor as if to announce their presence. Eyes turned instantly toward the two officers, murmurs rising around them. In the lavish setting of the event, their arrival was an ugly tear across a polished canvas. Before anyone could speak, Doyle let out a loud laugh, half mocking, half daring, then raised his voice so that everyone could hear. "Is this Cole's new colored stepmother?" The question dropped heavy and raw, like a blade slicing through the glittering air. In that instant, the room went still. A few women covered their mouths, brows furrowed on faces that lived for scandal. Selena stood motionless, still holding Noah and Nora close to her chest, her eyes locked on Doyle's, but her lips silent. The air was so thick that even a spoon tapping a glass rang sharply. The insult was no longer veiled or coded, it was a public slap delivered in front of hundreds. Adrian was near the long banquet table, his hand tightening around his wineglass, knuckles turning white. The vein at his temple throbbed, each breath heavier than the last. He had masked his tension with a social smile all evening, but that line shattered everything. It wasn't just an insult to Selena, it struck at the very dignity of his family. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a screech. Striding into the center of the hall, his eyes scanned the crowd before landing on Doyle's smirking face. "Enough," Adrian's voice boomed, bouncing off the high ceiling, heavy like a hammer blow. He slammed his hand down on the table, the force rattling every glass in its path. Every head turned. Conversations died mid-sentence, leaving behind a silence so thick it echoed. He looked directly at Grant and Doyle, his voice lower but unshakable, each word landing like a nail. "She's worth more than all the lies in this room." Those words dropped into the silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples through the entire room. A few guests flinched, some quickly looked away, and others pressed their lips together, unable to speak. Selena's hand tightened on the children's shoulders, her heart pounding, but her face remained composed. In that moment, Adrian had defended her not with silence or vague justifications, but with a clear, resounding declaration that cut through every whisper. Grant blinked, his expression flickering with surprise, while Doyle pressed his lips into a line, his smirk slowly fading. The arrogance in their eyes wavered, as neither of them had expected Adrian to say such words in front of a crowd. The atmosphere in the grand hall was like dry kindling catching fire, tense and ready to ignite. But Adrian's firm tone caused hesitation, halting the sneers and silencing the murmurs. Noah and Nora blinked up at their father, wide-eyed and stunned. From within Selena's arms, the children seemed to sense an unfamiliar strength emerging from the man they had only known as stern and distant. Selena lifted her head, catching Adrian's gaze. There was still anger burning in his eyes, but beneath it was something deeper: protection, a silent admission that she was no longer standing alone. The orchestra continued playing, but the music was muffled by the lingering echo of his outburst and declaration. What was meant to be an evening of elegance and prestige had become a stage where truth was laid bare, where one sentence stripped away layers of pretense. From that moment on, no one in the hall could deny the shift that had taken place. Adrian Cole had chosen to stand with Selena, and that choice would bring consequences no one could yet predict. The next morning, major newspapers simultaneously ran stories about the Charity Gala, but the focus wasn't on the donation totals. Instead, headlines centered on the tense moment when Adrian Cole publicly defended Selena against Grant and Doyle's insult. A photo of his hand slamming the table, his furious expression, and the resounding quote, "Wary," printed in bold across front pages. Online outlets seized the moment with blazing headlines: "Millionaire Cole defends Black Nanny. Police under fire for racist remarks." Within hours, forums buzzed with debate. Supporters praised Adrian's courage, while critics accused him of ruining the event's formality. In the top-floor office of the Cole Group Tower, Adrian sat in silence, his eyes fixed on a screen filled with headlines. A soft knock broke the stillness. His personal attorney, Thomas Reed, entered with a thick folder in hand. Adrian motioned for him to sit, eyes never leaving the still image of Grant and Doyle cut from the widely shared video. "I want to know everything about them," Adrian said hoarsely. "Everything that never makes the papers." Thomas nodded, understanding immediately, and opened the folder, revealing preliminary notes on the two officers. The first pages held public records, years of service, commendations, and achievement reports. But the deeper Thomas flipped, the darker Adrian's expression grew. There were vague reports of unlawful arrests, ignored complaints, and untraceable funds. The phrase "complaint dismissed" appeared repeatedly, like a stamp proving the system's protective shield over them. Adrian leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Images of Selena's past arrest, recently uncovered in the file, flashed through his mind, aligning with the open humiliation she endured the night before. A thread began to weave itself through these events, and he realized this wasn't mere personal spite, it was a pattern, deliberate and repeated, targeting the vulnerable. His anger didn't explode. It condensed into a cold, sharp resolve. Thomas looked up, eyes searching. "Are you sure you want to go this far? Taking on the police means trouble, especially when they with people backing them." Adrian was silent for a long moment, then replied slowly, "I can't let them keep trampling others, and I will not let them humiliate my children again. Dig deep, find proof, leave nothing out." His voice wasn't loud, but each word carried the weight of determination. Outside, the media continued to exploit the event. Some outlets even interviewed witnesses who recalled the moment Selena raised her head and firmly declared, "Crime isn't about skin color. Crime is those in uniform who forget justice." The statement became a secondary headline, widely shared as a slogan. Public opinion remained divided, but momentum began to shift toward condemning the police, especially as anonymous witnesses started revealing questionable past behaviors by Grant and Doyle. That evening, in his office, Adrian stood by the window, staring down at the city lights. The traffic below looked like moving streaks of light, but inside him, old questions kept gnawing. Did he have the strength to go against an entire system to defend the truth, or would he once again be swallowed by silence and concealment? This time, unlike nights before, Adrian knew there was no turning back. What stood before him was no longer just personal pride, but the fragile trust of two children in their father, and the proud presence of Selena, the one who had forced him to see himself clearly. That night, Adrian didn't drink. He sat in silence, waiting for updates from Thomas, tension stretched tight across his chest. Outside, a sudden downpour tapped against the glass, reminding him of the night of the storm. But this time, there was no panic inside him, only the calm readiness for another storm, the storm of truth. One late afternoon, just as Adrian had finished a meeting with Thomas, Selena knocked gently and stepped in. She saw the desk covered in files and printed photos, Grant and Doyle's faces appearing repeatedly. She didn't need to ask. She already knew what Adrian was planning. He looked up, eyes red from sleepless nights, voice hoarse but resolute. "I'm going to take them down. I'll make sure this city sees who they really are." Selena stood still for a few seconds, then shook her head slightly. She stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "Don't seek revenge. Let justice reveal itself. If you fight with hatred, you're no different from them." The words struck like a sharp blade, halting the fire building inside Adrian. He clenched his fists, ready to argue, but her steady gaze silenced him. Selena sat down, flipping through a few pages of the files, her eyes dimming at the notes. She remembered the day her brother was dragged away in an unjust raid, remembered the cold stares of Grant and Doyle. That wound had never fully healed, but she had learned that to defeat violence, you needed to shine light, not cast more darkness. Adrian watched her quietly, feeling his urge for retaliation slowly deflate, replaced by something else, a need to find a way for truth to speak for itself. That evening, Thomas returned with a new set of documents. He lowered his voice, opened his leather briefcase, and pulled out a series of evidence from confidential sources. Among them were copies of shady financial transactions, funds flowing into the personal accounts of Grant and Doyle from businesses linked to street violence. Adrian leaned down and read through each page, his eyes darkening as he saw the list of cases in which the two officers had deliberately tampered with records, from swapping evidence to pressuring witnesses into silence. Each line struck like a hammer blow, making him more aware of how serious the problem truly was. "These aren't rumors," Thomas said, his voice heavy. "There's a trail. Both of them took bribes to cover for violent offenders for years. Some cases never even saw the light of day, but now we can track them." Adrian leaned back in his chair, hands clasped tightly, head bowed. He felt both fury and sorrow because everything he had witnessed recently was just the tip of the iceberg. Selena sat beside him, listening closely, her expression free of surprise. She had long understood how the system worked, but still, a quiet ache stirred within her, because this truth meant that countless families had endured injustice in silence. The air in the room thickened, broken only by the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Adrian lifted his head and looked straight at Thomas. "What are we going to do with this?" The lawyer furrowed his brow slightly, then replied, "We'll gather more evidence, lock down all sources, and wait for the right moment to bring it forward. Once it's public, no one will be able to deny it." Selena nodded, her hand resting gently on the folder, as if it wasn't just paper but the lives and voices of those long forgotten. That night, after everyone had left, Adrian stayed behind alone in the office. He opened the folder again, reading and rereading the cold words: bribery, cover-up, record tampering. Each word etched deeper into his memory, confirming that this fight was no longer about defending a nanny or preserving family reputation, but about exposing a truth that had been buried too long. And within him, Selena's words echoed again, pulsing with every heartbeat. "Don't seek revenge. Let justice reveal itself." For the first time, Adrian felt a calm emerge from that advice, like a flame just bright enough to guide him through the thick darkness of power and deceit. That night, the Cole mansion was quieter than usual. The rain from earlier had drained the humidity, leaving only wind drifting through the wide-open windows. In the living room, warm yellow light spilled onto the wooden floor, creating a rare moment of calm. Adrian sat in an armchair, a glass of wine untouched in his hand, his gaze not on the drink but staring far into the darkness outside. Selena entered, carrying a cup of hot tea, and set it gently on the table. They didn't speak for the first few minutes. Only the ticking of the wall clock echoed, as if to remind them that time was still moving. Adrian took a deep breath, his voice hoarse, as though it had been restrained for too long. "I've never told anyone here about my wife's death." Selena looked up slightly, her eyes attentive, but she said nothing. He continued, each word slow and deliberate. "It was a rainy night, and the car lost control on the highway. I was called to the scene when everything was already too late. That image still haunts me: the flashing police lights, the pouring rain, and her, lying motionless." His voice broke at the end, his hand tightening around the glass until his knuckles turned white. Selena sat still, her heart heavy as she listened. Adrian lowered his head, as if speaking more to himself than to her. "Since that day, I've been alone. Everything in this house has lost its meaning. I thought I could fill that void with work, with power, but the truth is, I lost the ability to be a father. I gave orders to my kids, told them to be quiet, because I couldn't stand hearing their cries. It reminded me of someone who was no longer there." His eyes were wet but resolute, as if he had finally opened a wound he had hidden for too long. Selena sighed, resting a hand on her knee, then spoke slowly. "I know that feeling, because I lost someone too, not to an accident, but to injustice." She paused, took a breath, her deep, dark eyes reflecting a buried sorrow. "My younger brother was only 17, walking home from school one evening, when the police stopped him on a baseless suspicion. They claimed he was hiding a weapon, but he had nothing except a book in his hands. Still, a single bullet ended his life, right in front of witnesses. And it all got reduced to a few dry lines. Mistaken discharge in the line of duty." Selena's voice dropped, her hands clasped together, trembling slightly. "From that day on, my life changed. I stopped believing in easy justice, but I knew I couldn't afford to collapse. I threw myself into future steps, teaching children music, because I believe that when their souls are filled with melodies, the darkness can't swallow them." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her voice remained firm. Adrian looked at her for a long time, his gaze as if staring into a mirror reflecting his own pain. In the extended silence, they both realized the invisible distance between them was slowly fading. Their losses, though different in circumstance, had carved the same scar deep in their hearts, allowing them to understand each other more than words ever could. Selena spoke softly, but with resolve. "We can't bring them back, but we can protect those still here. Noah and Nora need you. They need a father who knows how to love, not a wall of silence. And I need to see real justice awaken." Adrian was silent, his hands trembling. At last, he placed his glass on the table, without taking another sip. In that moment, beneath the dim light of the room, two people who once believed they had nothing to share found a deep connection. The pain of loss, though shaped differently, had become a thread between them, allowing them to sit side by side without needing many words. Outside, the night wind still swept through the garden, but inside, a new quiet opened up, carrying with it a fragile hope that from old wounds, a different kind of beginning might grow. The silence stretched, filled only by the ticking of the clock. Adrian and Selena sat across from each other, saying nothing more, because their pain had found its echo. In their eyes, grief blended together, reflecting, and somehow, comforting. Adrian leaned back, his gaze softening, while Selena sat upright, her hands folded on her lap, eyes glistening in the warm yellow light. Pain hadn't driven them apart. On the contrary, it had drawn them closer, forcing them to admit that behind every hardened shell, they each bore a wound, not yet healed. Outside the room, Noah and Nora, who had woken in the night and gone looking for their father, had paused without realizing. The two children quietly huddled by the half-open door, listening to a heavy conversation they couldn't fully understand. All they sensed was their father's voice tightening when he spoke of their mother, and Selena's trembling voice when she spoke of her lost brother. These sounds weren't like scolding, nor the tension they were used to. They were something real, something sorrowful, and it made their hearts ache, too. Noah leaned toward Nora, whispering, his voice hesitant but clear, "She hurts like Dad does." Nora gave a small nod, tears sliding down her soft cheeks. They looked at each other, their young eyes shining with a sudden understanding. They had always run into Selena's arms because it felt safe, but now they began to see something deeper. She wasn't just someone who hugged and soothed them to sleep. She was someone carrying the same kind of loss their family bore. Selena suddenly looked up, sensing something different. She turned toward the door. It remained slightly ajar, the small shapes of the two children barely visible through the narrow gap. She didn't call them out, just offered a gentle smile, allowing them to hold on to the moment for themselves. Adrian saw it too, and his heart tightened, but for the first time, he didn't feel annoyed by their eavesdropping. Instead, a calm settled over him. Maybe the children would be the thread that tied him and Selena together, through their innocence and honesty. In the room bathed in warm yellow light, the four of them, though not sitting together, seemed to share the same stillness. The pain from two lives, a father who lost his wife, a sister who lost her brother, touched and quietly unfolded before the children's eyes. That moment felt like an unspoken promise that they would no longer be alone in their grief. And from that sense of shared loss, a new kind of family, though not yet acknowledged, was silently beginning to form. News about Grant and Doyle spread faster than anyone had predicted. It wasn't just the video from the park, or the incident at the Charity Gala. Their dark past was being unearthed. Every record of covering up violence, every trace of bribery exposed, like spreading ink. Major online news sites reported in unison. Several TV channels aired special segments, interviewing witnesses who had once been wrongfully detained by the two officers. Their names became symbols of rot within the system, followed by a wave of public outrage unlike anything before. On social media, hashtags calling for justice for the victims flooded every platform. Images from the video of Selena declaring, "Crime isn't skin color," were turned into posters, shared millions of times. People wrote angry captions. "It's time to sweep out the darkness. No more room for Grant and Doyle in uniform." Stories from the past resurfaced families who had suffered loss, young men interrogated just for the color of their skin. Each post was a small flame, together forming a raging fire. Outside the Central Police Department, crowds began to gather. At first, just a few dozen, then hundreds, then thousands. They held up signs, bold words on bright boards. "We want justice, not excuses. Grant and Doyle must be held accountable. Badges are not licenses to oppress." Chants rose like drumbeats, echoing through the streets, shaking the area with a tension that felt urgent and unstoppable. On the wide steps before the large entrance of the precinct, rows of other officers stood guard, shields raised, faces tight with unease. They knew public opinion had fully turned, and their presence felt both like a barrier and a spark to more anger. The chants kept coming, louder and closer together. In the crowd were families holding photos of their children, eyes blazing with fury and tears, lifting those images as irrefutable proof. Adrian watched it all from his office, the large screen streaming the scene live. His heart pounded, because for the first time, the truth was no longer trapped in cold files. It had become a wave outside, powerful enough to break through years of silence. Selena stood beside him, her gaze steady, her face calm, but her hands slightly clenched. She knew those footsteps weren't just for themselves, but for her brother, for the children whose voices had once been silenced. The chants echoed alongside the blaring horns of halted traffic. Reporters packed tightly to film, broadcasting live across platforms. Many political commentators spoke up, calling this a rare moment when society crossed the line between truth and deception. They talked about justice, faith in the law, and the responsibility of figures like Adrian Cole. He listened, each word striking deep, because he knew the time would come when he'd have to stand before that crowd and speak his choice aloud. Outside, darkness fell, but the fire of outrage didn't fade. More people arrived, hand in hand, voices rising in unison. In front of the precinct, the light from thousands of phone screens lit the street, like a sea of artificial stars. It was more than a protest, it became a collective vow that justice would no longer be buried. In that wave, the names Grant and Doyle were drowned, leaving only one message ringing out: justice for all. As night deepened, the crowd outside the precinct grew thicker, their chants reverberating against the cold gray walls. Media crews had cameras everywhere, their lights turning the plaza into a giant stage. Suddenly, a path opened as security escorted Adrian Cole up the steps. His expression was calm, but his eyes showed inner turmoil, knowing that every word he was about to say would shape how people saw his family and himself. The crowd recognized him, voices called his name, mixing support with doubt, but all waited. Adrian took a deep breath, gazing out at faces burning with conviction. He saw old photos held high, banners demanding an end to injustice, and tearful eyes of those who had lost someone. In that moment, the image of a successful businessman disappeared, leaving only a man at a crossroads. He stepped forward, his voice clear through the loudspeakers. Justice has no color. The words rang out, firm and deliberate, and the crowd fell silent for a heartbeat. Then cheers erupted, hands clapping in waves like thunder. Someone repeated his words, at first a few, then a chorus echoing across the square. Justice has no color. Thousands of voices turned the phrase into a powerful rhythm, drowning out the distant horns. Selena stood below, holding Nora, Noah's hand in hers, her heart trembling at the sight. She never expected the man who once kept his distance, who denied every bond, could speak the very words she had longed her whole life to hear from someone in power. Reporters immediately broadcast the statement, the words flashing across live screens. Justice has no color. Within hours, social media exploded. The phrase became a rallying cry, appearing in profile pictures, digital banners, and viral short clips. People edited footage of Adrian standing before the massive crowd, his face stern, eyes blazing, paired with the powerful quote. International news outlets quickly picked it up, calling it a bold declaration from a prominent figure in finance, more importantly, a public endorsement for voices long ignored. That night in the Cole mansion, the butler and house staff gathered around the screen, their eyes glowing as they replayed the quote. Noah and Nora sat side by side, wide-eyed, asking Selena, "Does that mean Dad will protect you now?" Selena gave a soft smile, pulling them close, her heart rising with a hope she had never dared to feel before. Adrian returned that night exhausted, but with a rare light in his eyes. He knew he had crossed a line he could never step back from. What seemed like just a statement had become a turning point, transforming him from a man of silence into a symbol of choice. From that day forward, every time he opened his phone, he saw his own image beside the slogan spreading everywhere. It no longer belonged to him alone, it had become a shared flame for thousands, millions, all seeking true justice. After Adrian's words echoed across the square and became a widely shared slogan, Grant and Doyle found themselves backed into a corner. Their reputations were tarnished, old records unearthed, past incidents once buried, now resurfacing all at once. Every path before them led to downfall and consequences. In a dim bar on the outskirts of town, the two conspired in frustration, voices low, eyes burning with hatred. Doyle slammed his hand on the table, whiskey sloshing in the glass. "If we stay quiet, we lose everything. We need to flip public opinion, make both Cole and that woman lose face." Grant lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and the flicker of flame reflected in his darkened eyes. "We'll set her up, frame her with something no one can ignore. If people believe she stole from the Cole mansion, everything will collapse." The plan was executed with precision. Late one night, while the mansion slept peacefully, hired men slipped through the back entrance and planted rare pieces of jewelry in Adrian's private vault. The security footage was tampered with just enough to make it seem like Selena was the only one entering during that time frame. Every detail was meticulously staged, and by the next morning, headlines exploded. Black Nanny suspected of theft in Cole Mansion. Major news outlets jumped in with varying tone. Some went sensational, declaring she was caught red-handed. Others were more reserved, emphasizing that no official conclusion had been made. Photos of Selena holding the children at the Charity Gala were edited and paired with captions like, "Abused their trust." Within hours, public opinion split again. One side mocked relentlessly, claiming they had suspected her all along, that all her bold speeches were just a mask. The other side pushed back, citing the moments she protected Noah and Nora, insisting she had no reason to betray the family. Online, the debate raged. Every article drew thousands of comments, endless arguments. One user wrote, "Told you no one trusts someone like her for no reason. Now it's all out in the open," another replied. "Don't rush to judgment. Those cops fooled the whole city once. They'd have no problem framing her. The comment threads burned with intensity, each side refusing to back down, reflecting a public tug-of-war trapped in growing uncertainty. Inside the Cole mansion, the atmosphere was heavy as stone. Adrian sat at his desk, face tense, flipping through newspaper pages. Seeing Selena's name smeared across headlines made his chest tighten, but questions churned in his mind. He knew she'd been falsely accused once, yet the evidence this time looked airtight. Then came the echo of his daughter's voice, Nora's words ringing in his head. "She's as kind as Mom." Adrian closed his eyes, torn by doubt and disbelief. Selena remained silent. She didn't defend herself to the press, didn't argue on social media. Her gaze was calm, yet held a quiet pride, because she knew that fighting back now would only give more weight to the trap. But in her heart, a deep ache was rising, not from being falsely accused, but from the fear that the trust of the two children might begin to falter. The trap Grant and Doyle had set was starting to fracture, not just public perception, but something even more fragile: the heart of the Cole family. Adrian sat quietly in his office, yellow lamplight spilling across the newspapers scattered over his desk. Headlines danced before his eyes, bold letters cutting deep like knives. Nanny, suspected of theft. Cole silent, amid scandal. His heart raced, his mind spun with edited images and forged evidence that seemed disturbingly convincing. He tried to recall every memory, every moment Selena had spent in the house, every gesture toward Noah and Nora, but exhaustion muddled his thoughts. Anger at being pulled into the storm and fear of losing public trust tangled together, leaving him disoriented, unsure what or who to believe. In the thick of that tension, Selena entered. She brought no urgency, no impulse to explain, just stood calmly across the desk, her eyes steady in the dim light. Adrian looked up, eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness, throat tightening at the sight of her. He wanted to ask, to demand answers, but the words rose and stuck. Between them, an unfamiliar distance suddenly felt sharper than ever. Selena met his eyes, her voice calm, every word landing heavy as stone. "If you believe me, I don't need to explain. If you doubt me, nothing I say will matter." The sentence, short and sharp, sliced through every defense. It was not a plea, nor an excuse, but a declaration. Amid the noise of public outrage, she chose dignified silence, placing the weight of choice entirely in Adrian's hands. He froze, unable to move, a storm of doubt churning inside. On one side, the fabricated evidence gnawed at him, making it hard to dismiss suspicion outright. On the other hand, Selena's unwavering gaze, the same one that had comforted his children on sleepless nights, refused to be ignored. He felt trapped, like a man caught at the center of a storm with no clear way out. The air felt heavy, broken only by the ticking of the clock. Selena stood motionless, her posture unwavering, her hands relaxed at her sides, as if to prove she had nothing to hide. That calmness made Adrian all the more ashamed. He was used to people approaching him with excuses, with pleading words, but this time, the woman in front of him chose silence, letting trust speak for itself. Noah and Nora suddenly appeared at the door, their young eyes shifting from their father to Selena. They didn't understand the noise outside, only the weight hanging in the house. Nora stepped forward and gently tugged Adrian's sleeve, her voice soft. "Daddy, she never takes anything. She just holds us when we sleep." The innocent words made Adrian's heart tremble. His gaze wavered. He looked down and saw no fear in his daughter's eyes, only pure trust. Selena glanced down at the two children, a faint smile flickering at the corner of her lips, then turned and walked away. Her figure slowly disappeared into the long hallway, leaving Adrian alone, his hand gripping the newspaper until it crumpled. In his mind, her words echoed again and again, resounding like a quiet reckoning. "If you believe me, I don't need to explain. If you doubt me, nothing I say will matter." And he knew, this moment would decide whether he chose to trust his eyes or his heart. One windless afternoon, the Cole estate seemed calm after days of turmoil. Noah sat in the living room with his little recorder, a gadget he often used for playing reporter. Recording conversations around the house had long been his way of capturing familiar sounds. That day, while Adrian was in a meeting with his associates and Selena was upstairs with Nora, Noah wandered around the garden and happened to overhear whispers near the back gate. His curiosity pulled him closer, and within seconds, he recognized the voices of Grant and Doyle. Holding his breath, he hid behind a bush and hit record. From the tiny speaker came clear voices. "We've planted the stuff inside the estate. Once it's found, the blame will fall squarely on her." Doyle's voice dripped with smugness, followed by a dry laugh. Grant responded with a hoarse tone. "Once the public turns on her, we won't even need real evidence. Cole will doubt himself. That's it. Game over." Their cruel exchange flowed straight into Noah's little recorder, making him tremble with fear, but he clutched it tightly, too scared to move. When the conversation ended and the two officers walked away, Noah's heart pounded. He ran straight into the house, pale-faced. Selena was startled by his panicked look, but all Noah managed to say was, "I have something for Dad." He handed the recorder to Adrian, his voice shaking. Adrian hit play. At first, just rustling sounds, then Doyle's voice, each word unmistakable. As the conversation went on, Adrian's expression changed, his eyes darkening. And when Grant spoke of turning him against Selena, Adrian's hand went limp. The recorder dropped onto the table, still playing, the vile words repeating in the silence. He sat frozen, his heart torn apart. "Oh God, I doubted someone innocent." The words slipped out, heavier than any sentence he'd ever heard. The image of Selena standing calmly before him, her sharp declaration. "If you believe me, I don't need to explain. If you doubt me, nothing I say will matter," came crashing back, cutting deep. He remembered the children's unwavering trust in her, remembered how she stayed up with Nora, how she nursed Noah through his fever. It all came rushing back, knotting his chest. Adrian collapsed into the chair, both hands gripping his head. Guilt weighed on him like stone, every breath quick and shallow. He realized that it was his own hesitation, his fear of losing face, that had fed into their filthy plan. In his mind, he no longer saw a powerful man, only a father who had nearly betrayed the trust of his children and the woman he should have protected. Selena stood nearby, a flicker of surprise in her eyes as she listened to the recording, but there was no trace of gloating on her face. She only sighed softly, because while the truth had finally come to light, the wound left by doubt would not easily fade. Noah clutched her hand. Nora ran to sit close beside her, both looking up at Adrian as if asking why he had ever let them feel afraid. The room was heavy with silence. The recording had stopped, but its echoes lingered. Adrian looked up, eyes bloodshot, and stared straight at Selena. He didn't speak an apology, because any words now felt too small. But in his gaze, remorse was unmistakable, like a silent vow that he would never again let suspicion overshadow justice. The recording, handed to Adrian's lawyer, leaked within a single night and spread at lightning speed. News outlets replayed it across every platform. Grant and Doyle's cruel words broadcast loud and clear, impossible to deny. Headlines appeared on nearly every front page. Framing scheme exposed. Irrefutable evidence. Public outrage, already simmering, exploded. Social media is filled with posts, edited clips, and scathing comments. Anger spread like wildfire, pushing Grant and Doyle from shielded officers to symbols of systemic corruption. On the streets, people who had once doubted Selena now publicly apologized, writing posts admitting they were wrong to believe baseless accusations. Outside the police headquarters, thousands gathered, raising new signs boldly declaring, "The truth has been proven." Chants echoed across the square, mixing with car horns and drumbeats, creating a wave of momentum never seen before. Clips of people celebrating as they listened to the recording went viral, showing that faith in justice had been reignited. In that atmosphere, the once arrogant officers became subjects of ridicule. The press dissected every detail, from irregularities in their bank accounts to long-buried misconduct. Their downfall was not only a collapse of reputation, but a stripping away of every layer of protection the system had once offered them. More and more people came forward. Former victims who had remained silent out of fear now found their chance to speak. A middle-aged woman appeared on television, her voice trembling but firm, recounting how her son had been beaten in a precinct just for walking home late. A man held up medical records, proving injuries from a traffic stop, a complaint that had been buried without reason. One by one, young people and families followed, each story, another piece of a puzzle that formed a complete picture of systematic abuse. The truth was no longer a few isolated claims, but a dense, undeniable chain strong enough to crush every denial. Adrian sat in the living room with Selena, Noah, and Nora, eyes fixed on the television broadcasting the live coverage. He remained silent as witnesses came forward one by one, feeling the weight of the growing wave. Selena said nothing, only gently placed her hand on the children's shoulders, her gaze reflecting a sadness mixed with pride. It was the pride of truth finally speaking out, and the sadness of knowing it had taken so much pain for people to find the courage to step into the light. Public reaction exploded, pressure mounting on the authorities, forcing them to break their silence. The voices defending Grant and Doyle gradually disappeared, replaced by demands for prosecution and a full investigation. On the news feeds, images of the two once proud officers were now edited with the caption, "Crime behind the badge." From those once humiliated to families who had lost loved ones, everyone joined in a single voice. And that voice roared like thunder. It was time justice truly returned to those it had been stolen from. After days of chaos, once the recording had fully shifted public opinion, and a wave of former victims spoke out, the name Selena Brooks suddenly became a focal point, not just within the Cole family, but across public forums. She was seen as a symbol of resilience, a woman who stood tall in the face of injustice, and that quickly drew the attention of a major national human rights organization. That afternoon, a representative from the group arrived at the Cole estate, sitting in the living room with a respectful demeanor, and extended an invitation for Selena to become the advocacy face of their new campaign. They wanted her to attend forums, appear in media programs, and most importantly, speak from the podium to push for legal reforms and an end to long-standing abuses of power. Selena listened in silence, her hands clasped together, eyes reflecting both surprise and hesitation. She had never imagined herself as the figurehead of a movement. Everything she had done so far had come from a simple conviction: protect the children and live by her conscience. But seeing the opportunity to use her voice to help bring about broader justice stirred something inside her. Adrian sat across from her, watching the conversation unfold from start to finish, a flicker of pride sparking in his eyes. When the representative left, Adrian spoke immediately. "If you say yes, I'll fund the entire campaign. No shortage of resources, no shortage of infrastructure. Just focus on your message." His voice was firm, his gaze steady, as if to assure her he was ready to stand fully behind her. It was the way Adrian had always operated in business: use financial strength to clear the path for any plan. But this time, he didn't realize his words had touched a deeply rooted sense of dignity within Selena. She paused for a few seconds, then gently shook her head. Her voice was calm, but each word carried weight. "I don't want to be your project. I want to stand on my own." The sentence sliced through the invisible gap between them. Adrian flinched slightly, his confident expression faltering. He almost argued that his money was only meant to help, that the campaign's success would accelerate with solid backing. But when he saw the unwavering look in her eyes, he held his tongue and sat quietly. Selena continued, her tone soft but resolute. "I've lost too much by letting others decide for me. My brother died because of baseless suspicion, and my whole life I've been seen through judgmental eyes. If I stand up now only to lean on a rich man's wallet, then I'm repeating that same cycle. I need people to see that I can walk on my own 2 feet, not hidden behind any shadow, even if that shadow is named Cole." The room fell silent, broken only by the soft sound of wind brushing against the glass. Adrian leaned back, his eyes heavy but no longer angry. Instead, a sense of admiration rose within him, tinged with the bitterness of realizing she had taught him a lesson more valuable than any business deal: that self-respect and freedom cannot be bought. He gave a small nod, a silent gesture of acceptance, his eyes lingering on her. Just then, Noah and Nora ran in, settling beside Selena, and eagerly asking about the earlier conversation. Selena smiled, gently tousling their hair, then looked at Adrian. Her gaze was calm but resolute, while his carried the quiet recognition that she had stepped far beyond the roles he once assigned her. From that moment on, Selena Brooks was no longer just the guardian of 2 children but an independent symbol, ready to bring her voice to millions beyond these walls. Noah and Nora sat beside Selena, their eyes sparkling after hearing her speak. They didn't fully grasp what the adults were discussing, but they clearly sensed she was standing at the edge of something important. When Selena said she wanted to walk on her own, the children clapped, their voices rising in spontaneous, fiery joy. "Miss Selena is our hero." The sound echoed through the room, sweeping away the earlier heaviness, replacing it with warmth and light. Selena laughed, her eyes bright with emotion, and wrapped her arms around the two, holding them close. Adrian sat still, watching the scene, moved to his core. In his children's eyes, he saw unwavering faith in Selena, no trace of doubt. The same children who once feared the night now shouted with pride, recognizing in her not just a caregiver, but a pillar of strength. That moment left Adrian frozen, as if his mind had suddenly cleared. He realized he had always seen Selena through the lens of an employer clinging to control, but in truth, her presence had changed the small world he shared with his children. Selena kept smiling, her eyes glistening, while inside, warmth rose like a tide. She had never hoped to be anyone's hero, never imagined one day she'd hear that word from the lips of children who had lost their mother. But when Noah and Nora spoke it aloud, something inside her eased, the old pain softened, as if tiny hands were gently tending to the wounds in her heart. Adrian leaned back, his exhale long, as if finally releasing a tight knot. When his eyes met Selena's, the look was no longer guarded or questioning. It held admiration, gratitude, and above all, change. He was beginning to see that this woman was no longer just a nanny. She was the one who had lifted his children's spirits, made them laugh, helped them believe in goodness, and, at the same time, she had become the mirror forcing him to face himself. The room was quiet, filled only with the pure laughter of 2 children and the pounding heartbeat of a man waking up. Adrian looked at Selena for a long time, his eyes heavy with words he couldn't yet say. He wanted to admit that he owed her more than anyone, that her presence had started a new chapter in his and his children's lives. But instead of speaking, he let it sit within him, allowing his gaze to speak for him. Selena caught that look, paused briefly, her heart fluttering just slightly, then turned to gently stroke the children's heads, as if seeking comfort in their innocence. In that brief moment, an invisible bond tightened. Adrian no longer saw Selena as an employee in a vast house, but as someone woven into the fabric of their family, someone strong enough to lead them out of their darkest nights. And from that single look, a quiet turning point was set in motion, marking the start of changes that none of them would be able to reverse in the journey they were now taking together. The Cole Group board meeting took place in the glass-walled room on the top floor, where every decision could affect thousands of employees and the company's international standing. A long, round table cold white lights reflected the tense expressions of every board member. Financial reports displayed on the large screen showed alarming declines following recent events. The CFO spoke first, his voice slow but firm. "We're losing major contract. Big corporations want no part in racial controversy. They're asking us to remain silent, to say nothing more about the police or that woman." Murmurs of agreement followed, heads nodded, and all eyes turned toward Adrian. Adrian sat at the head of the table, quietly listening, fingers interlaced on the polished wood. He could see the worry in his colleagues' eyes. Stock prices had begun to drop, the press kept dragging Cole's name into the headlines, and investors were threatening to pull out. Another member spoke up, tone sharp. "If you keep siding with the nanny, we'll pay a heavy price." The Cole empire can't fall over a moment of emotion. Each word landed like a nail, pushing Adrian toward a choice he couldn't avoid. At that moment, he lifted his head, eyes blazing. In the past days, he had seen Selena shielding his children, heard the crowd chanting, "Justice has no color," and remembered the short, piercing sentence his daughter had whispered, "She's as good as mom." All of it fused into a force no warning could shake. Adrian took a deep breath, then said, clear and firm, "I choose justice, not silence." The room went still. No more pen tapping, no whispers. Faces froze in disbelief. Some frowned, others leaned back, visibly displeased. One director stood abruptly. "Do you understand what you just said? You're willing to risk everything to defend a stranger?" Adrian turned, locking eyes with each of them, his voice lower but steady. "She's not a stranger. She saved my children, and she represents what's right, the things we've forgotten. If we stay silent, we're only helping the lies survive." The air grew so tense, it could be cut. A few tried to argue, throwing out numbers, warning of losses and collapse. But Adrian had stopped listening. His decision had been made long before walking into that room. He was no longer a businessman measuring deals, but a father who had seen true value through his children's eyes, and a man who had found his faith again standing beside a woman who had endured injustice. When the meeting ended, many left with anger on their faces, a few even muttering threats to pull their investments. Adrian remained alone in the empty room, his eyes cast down over the glowing city below. Inside, a quiet worry lingered about the company's future, but above all, he felt a peace he hadn't known in years. For the first time in a long while, he knew he hadn't run, hadn't betrayed his own beliefs or those of the people he loved. And that choice, even if it shook the foundations of Cole Group, was one he was ready to carry to the end. Following Adrian's firm declaration at the meeting, the backlash came swiftly. Within days, several major shareholders sent formal notices of divestment. On the market, Cole Group stock plummeted, electronic boards glowing red across trading floors, prompting endless commentary from financial analysts. Headlines in business media screamed skepticism. Cole Group reels from racial controversy. Can justice be bought with shareholder money? Experts warned that if the trend continued, many of the corporation's key projects would be delayed. Within the company, employees murmured anxiously, some fearing for the future. Others unnerved to see the company's once stable standing suddenly shaken. Adrian received full reports each morning, each red figure like a blade to the heart. But unlike his usual restlessness, this time he was no longer shaken. He read carefully, signed what needed signing, then quietly folded the documents, as if accepting that every loss was a price worth paying. In a brief press conference, when asked whether he regretted speaking out, Adrian looked straight into the camera, voice low but firm. "I accept every consequence. From now on, my name and my company's name will be tied to justice. If losing the comfort of silence is the cost, it's one I'm willing to bear." That statement spread quickly, reigniting public debate. Some called him reckless, claiming he had endangered the entire company. Thousands of others voiced support, seeing him as a rare example of someone choosing human values over profit. Adrian's image shifted from a cold millionaire in a tailored suit to a father who once trembled watching a stranger protect his children, to a man willing to step out of his comfort zone and face the truth. Inside the Cole mansion, the atmosphere had changed. Noah and Nora didn't grasp complex ideas like stocks or investments, but they overheard enough to know their father had lost money for standing by Miss Selena. In their young eyes, that wasn't failure, it was victory. Nora ran to hug her father and whispered, "You're not afraid, so we're not afraid either." Noah nodded, his eyes glowing with pride, as if to say they finally had a father who truly stood up for what was right. Selena witnessed everything, her heart overwhelmed by an emotion she couldn't quite name. She knew Adrian had always feared losing control, but now, he was willingly shedding that armor to become something real. She looked at him, and saw that his eyes no longer held empty pride, but a rare calm. It was the look of a man who had made a choice and one that could never be taken back. Though financial storms still loomed, Adrian had chosen to keep walking this path. He knew his reputation would be torn apart, that longtime partners might turn their backs on him, but he also understood one thing. If he backed down now, he would spend the rest of his life as a shadow of himself. Instead of bowing to money, Adrian Cole had chosen to stand tall for justice, and that choice had transformed him into someone new. The Capitol building gleamed under the autumn morning sun, hundreds of media lenses trained on the grand entrance as people filed in. The hearing on police abuse of power had been announced weeks prior, but public outrage already boiling had erupted after the leaked audio of Grant and Doyle. Protest signs, demanding transparency, and chants of slogans echoed across the plaza, creating a tension-charged atmosphere. Inside the main chamber, rows of lawmakers sat in a semicircle. Above them, the solemn wooden podium. This was where real voices would have to face the light. Adrian sat in the audience, dressed sharply in a suit, his eyes contemplative. Beside him, Noah and Nora were kept backstage, as he wanted to shield them from the overwhelming scene. Adrian's heart weighed heavily, knowing the moment ahead was no longer just about a nanny and his family, but a public reckoning between justice and a rotting system of power. Selena entered, composed, her face illuminated by the lights, her eyes focused, though tension flickered beneath. Every gaze from the press and the crowd turned toward her, some admiring, others scrutinizing. When invited to the stand, Selena drew a deep breath and placed her hand on the microphone. Her voice rang out, steady and sharp, slicing through the dense air. "They treat skin color like a crime, but the real crime is abuse of power." The words landed like a strike, and for a brief moment, the room fell silent. Many exchanged glances, some scribbled hastily, and others looked up, fully engaged. Selena continued, speaking of what she had witnessed of children of color, expelled from school simply for being poor, of her brother shot dead over an unfounded suspicion. Her voice didn't tremble, every word hit like it was carved into stone, leaving marks that could not be erased. Below, Adrian listened closely, stirred by a spectrum of emotions. He saw a strength he had never dared to show himself. Outside, the chants of the crowd carried through the thick walls, echoing each of Selena's words. People had waited far too long for voices like this, and today, it was being heard from the highest platform. A senator rose, his tone firm. "Do you have any concrete evidence beyond testimony?" Selena didn't waver, her eyes brightening. "The leaked recording is one proof. But the evidence is also in the scars, in the families who've lost loved ones, whose stories you've heard for weeks. Those are testimonies that cannot be denied." Her answer stirred murmurs across the room, heads nodded, pens raced across paper. The tension lingered until Adrian was called to speak. He stepped forward, his tall figure commanding under the spotlight that lit up his dark suit. Standing at the microphone, he glanced briefly at Selena, then looked directly at the panel of lawmakers. His voice was low, steady. "I'm Adrian Cole. I used to believe power and money could keep my family safe, but I was wrong. I witnessed 2 police officers disgrace and attempt to destroy the reputation of the woman who saved my children. I saw them set her up, and I'm bringing here financial documents that prove they took bribes to cover up crimes." He placed a folder on the wooden desk, each page projected onto the large screen behind him, showing clear figures and transaction records to the public. The chamber trembled, camera shutters clicked non-stop, flashes of light bursting across the room. Some senators whispered among themselves, and others sat in silence. Outside, the crowd's chants grew louder, slogans of "Justice has no color," blending with waves of cheers. Selena stood below, watching Adrian, her eyes filled with both recognition and emotion. The hearing lasted for hours, but its most powerful moment came when 2 voices, one from a woman once dismissed, the other from a businessman long known for his silence, merged into a unified declaration. As the session ended, reporters swarmed forward, microphones and cameras pointed in all directions. Headlines quickly took shape. Selena Brooks, "Abuse of power is the real crime." Adrian Cole publicly reveals bribery evidence. Adrian walked out beside Selena, blinding flashes lighting up their faces. In the roar of reporters and the rising chants from the plaza, they knew the battle was far from over, but they also knew they had taken a step from which there was no return. Justice, from now on, was tied to their names, not just a distant slogan, but a belief being reignited in millions of hearts. Adrian opened his leather briefcase, his hand slightly trembling, but his eyes glowing with unwavering resolve. He pulled out the folders, each page thick with text and numbers, clipped together with bank statements. He placed them on the wooden desk, the sound solid and sharp in the dense air. "These are proof that Grant and Doyle did not act alone," Adrian said, his voice low and firm. "They are part of a protection network that's existed for years, taking money from criminals in exchange for shielding them." As the pages were projected onto the large screen behind him, the chamber fell utterly silent. The figures appeared clearly money transfers to anonymous accounts, receipts from underground groups, all matching the timeline of ignored cases. There was no longer any room for denial. Whispers rippled through the chamber as many lawmakers exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of shock and outrage. One slammed a pen against the desk and pressed, "Are you certain this source is legal and indisputable?" Adrian responded immediately, without hesitation. "Everything has been verified by independent auditors, along with testimonies from silenced witnesses. This system has protected violence, and today I'm bringing it into the light to end it." His firm words echoed through the room, prompting several heads to nod in agreement. Selena sat below, her hands clenched, eyes fixed on the podium. She had once hoped that justice would be called by name, but she never expected the moment would come through the collaboration of a woman once scorned and a millionaire once known for silence. The emotion welled in her eyes, but she remained silent, allowing Adrian's words to resonate. Across the aisle, reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked non-stop, flashes lighting the room as if trying to etch every second into history. When Adrian finished his statement, the room fell into a few seconds of silence, then suddenly erupted. Applause broke from one corner and quickly swept across the chamber. Even senators who had remained neutral stood to clap. The entire hall trembled with the sound, not just as an endorsement of one man, but of the truth that had just been revealed. The applause blended with the chants rising from the plaza outside, forming a powerful rhythm unlike anything heard before. In that moment, Adrian stood still, taking a deep breath. He knew the road ahead would be long, that those behind this network would not surrender easily. But at the very least, today, the truth had been laid bare before millions of eyes. He turned to Selena, their eyes met, and between them passed a quiet recognition. From this point forward, they were inseparable allies in this fight. Right after the hearing, the press surged forward, and bold headlines were quickly published. Cole exposes protection network. Justice has no color. Truth proven in Congress. The next morning's newspapers all featured the image of Adrian placing the files on the table, with the words, "Justice for all," held high by the crowd outside in the background. A photo of Selena standing in the chamber, her gaze unwavering, appeared on multiple international news sites, hailed as the woman who turned pain into power. At cafes, on subways, in small suburban homes, people read the news, watched the coverage, and talked with excitement. There were sighs of relief, satisfied nods, and even tears streaming down the faces of families who had once endured injustice. They knew justice hadn't completely prevailed yet, but at the very least, the truth had spoken clearly and irreversibly. At the Cole estate that evening, Adrian returned after a long day to find Noah and Nora waiting in the living room. The two children ran up and hugged him tightly, shouting with innocent joy, "You're our hero, Dad." Selena stood nearby, smiling, but her gaze wasn't one of personal praise for Adrian, rather, a quiet belief that they had now entered a new era, one where darkness could no longer hide the truth for long. And more importantly, they had shown the world that once justice is awakened, it spreads with a force no power can suppress. The preliminary trial of Grant and Doyle unfolded under the breathless anticipation of the public. From early morning, crowds gathered outside the courthouse, raising banners with slogans demanding transparency. Reporters packed the area, cameras pointed in every direction, missing nothing. When the two officers were escorted out of the prisoner transport van, the clinking of shackles echoed through the noise, and the crowd held its breath. In stark contrast to their usual arrogance, Grant and Doyle now appeared gaunt, though their eyes still flashed with bitterness. Doyle's scream tore through the air. "You'll pay for this, Selena." His voice dripped with hatred, aimed at the woman standing at a distance, surrounded by security. Grant shouted as well, spewing foul words, desperate to cling to any shred of power. The outraged crowd answered with jeers, some raising their fists, others chanting, "Justice! Justice!" The tension was palpable, but quickly quelled as security dragged them inside, cutting off their venom before it could spread another second. Selena stood still, eyes locked on the two men who had caused so much pain, now being dragged away. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with the weight of memory, moments of injustice suffered by her and her brother, wounds that never fully healed. But this time, she was not alone. A warm hand gripped hers, firm and reassuring. Adrian stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the scene, but his voice, low and steady, reached her ear. "Justice is the only verdict that matters." Those words dropped into Selena like a stone, calming the turmoil and reigniting her belief. She turned to look at Adrian, finding no trace of confusion or doubt in his gaze, only quiet conviction. For the first time, She felt true solidarity, not from a wealthy man offering shelter through money, but from a person who had genuinely chosen to stand on the side of truth. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere boiled. Evidence rolled in audio recordings, financial records laying bare the network of protection and blatant abuse of power. Every accusation turned Grant and Doyle paler, their protests drowned in the tide of proof. Victims once silenced now sat in the front row, their eyes unwavering, living witnesses that truth could not be buried. Outside, thousands still waited, their chants echoing down the block. Many cried, as the live stream showed the once arrogant officers now standing trial. Posters with images of Selena and Adrian were raised high, not just as symbols of a court case, but as a declaration that justice had finally begun. Adrian kept holding Selena's hand, his eyes reflecting a rare calm. He knew the road ahead was still long, that public opinion could shift, and his company continued to suffer losses. But in that moment, witnessing the fall of two abusers, he knew he had made the right choice. Selena gave a small nod without speaking, but her returning grip was enough to send a message. They were no longer just individuals, but allies in a journey larger than themselves. When the final gavel struck, the courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. The crowd outside joined in, a sea of sound that drowned out every remaining fear. Grant and Doyle lifted their faces in despair, but their false pride had crumbled completely. And in that instant, amid the flashes of countless cameras, Selena felt the pain of the past ease just a little, while Adrian quietly understood that his life had found a new direction, one tied to justice and truth. As the hearing ended, the crowd poured out of the courthouse in celebration, chants of justice echoing down the street. In the flow of people, Noah and Nora came running toward Selena, their eyes shimmering, tiny arms clinging to her like they feared she might disappear into the crowd. They pressed their faces against her chest, voices breaking with emotion. "Mom," the word slipped out unconsciously, but it was powerful enough to silence the world around them. Selena froze, her heart tightening, eyes glistening, arms trembling as she held them close. She had never expected it, had never dared to hope she would hear it, but the moment arrived like an unexpected gift, warming every old wound. Adrian stood nearby, watching everything, his face stilled, eyes heavy, then slowly lifted as if to absorb the moment into his heart. There was no doubt in his gaze now, only silent acknowledgement. He stepped forward and placed a hand on Selena's shoulder, saying nothing more, but the gesture carried weight. Their bond had moved beyond employer and employee, beyond someone who hired and someone who served. They had become a family, bound by trust, loss, and quiet love. A few days later, Adrian decided to hold a memorial for his late wife. It had been 2 years since the accident, but burdened by work and pain, he had never truly done anything to honor her memory. The ceremony took place in the garden behind the mansion, where the rose bushes she loved still bloomed. The air was still, wind gently passing through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and soft petals. Adrian wore a black suit, standing before a large photo of his wife placed on a white-covered table. Noah and Nora sat below, eyes misty with tears but calmer than before. Selena stood beside them, her face gentle, one hand quietly holding the children's, as if to pass them a sense of strength. That moment left many family members and close friends silent, not because Selena felt out of place, but because her presence brought a sense of completeness. Adrian began to speak, slow but clear. "I know you're still watching over the three of us. Today, for the first time, I have the courage to do this. I failed when I tried to hide my pain in silence, but you can rest easy now. I won't be alone anymore. Noah and Nora have someone beside them, not to replace you, but to help me keep loving them." His voice grew hoarse near the end, but his gaze stayed firm. Selena listened, her heart tightening, not from sorrow, but from the belief that he had truly stepped out of the shadows. Noah looked up and whispered, "Dad, I think Mom's smiling." Nora leaned her head against Selena's shoulder, eyes shining as she looked at the photo and softly said, "Mom is in the sky, but there's Mom here too." The innocent words made everyone misty-eyed. Selena bent down and held them tightly, tears rolling down her cheeks, sweet tears, because she knew she had been accepted, not as a replacement, but as someone helping them write the next chapter. The ceremony closed beneath golden afternoon light, petals drifting gently down like a final farewell. Adrian stood beside Selena and the children, 3 silhouettes side by side in front of the photo, forming a scene both solemn and warm. Friends and loved ones looked on, each of them sensing a quiet transformation in this family. A family once broken had found a way to heal, not by forgetting, but by honoring memory and nurturing new love. In Adrian's eyes as he looked at Selena, there was gratitude, respect, and a quiet hope. He no longer saw just a strong nanny, but a companion, someone who had changed both him and his children. And from that day on, in Adrian Cole's heart, family was no longer something lost. It was something growing, something real, anchored by 3 small voices calling out from deep within, Mom. That afternoon, the city's central square buzzed with the vibrant atmosphere of the annual community festival. Booths lined the streets, the scent of food wafted through the air, and cheerful laughter blended with music from the main stage. It was a rare moment when people gathered not to protest or demand justice, but to share joy, to affirm unity after the storm. Amid the crowd, Adrian walked with Noah and Nora, Selena right beside him, her face radiant but calm as always. The two children wore simple outfits, but their eyes sparkled with excitement. During the audience interaction segment, the organizers unexpectedly invited Noah and Nora to join Selena on stage. The crowd erupted into applause as spotlights lit up their small figures and the composed woman beside them. Adrian paused for a second, his heart stirred by the sight, a mix of surprise and emotion. The children hesitated briefly, their hands tightly gripping Selena's, but her gentle guidance gave them the courage to take another step forward into the stage's bright lights. The host announced that Noah and Nora would perform a simple dance their mother had once taught them. The audience fell momentarily silent, then clapped again, encouragingly. Selena knelt down to their eye level, whispering, "Just think of it as a game. Your mom is surely smiling somewhere." Nora's eyes shimmered, and Noah gave a small nod before both stepped into the center of the stage. The music began, a familiar melody their mother used to hum in the old days. At first, their steps were clumsy, arms awkward, but Selena stood behind them gently, guiding with her hands, eyes full of encouragement. She supported each movement, steadied Nora when she stumbled, and adjusted Noah's shoulders when he lost the rhythm. Slowly, they regained confidence, syncing with the music, wide smiles lighting up their young faces. In the audience, Adrian stood still, a lump rising in his throat. He saw glimpses of his late wife in their every move, but he also saw Selena, present and steady, the bridge between past and present. Those little feet no longer trembled, they were steadied by a guiding hand. He realized this wasn't just a performance, it was the beginning of a new chapter in his children's lives. The audience clapped in rhythm, some wiping away tears, others smiling, all feeling the sacredness in every step. As the music ended, Noah and Nora opened their arms and bowed, Selena standing beside them, her hand still gently at their backs. Applause roared across the square, echoing like a wave. People rose to their feet, cheering their names, calling out, "Selena," affirming their place in the heart of the community. Noah turned to Selena, his smile beaming, breathless as he said, "Mom, I did it." Nora hugged her tightly, her voice soft and quick. Mom in heaven must be proud too. Selena held them both close, tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy, of healing. She knew those first steps weren't just a dance, they were proof that the wounds in the children's hearts were slowly closing. Adrian stepped onto the stage, placed a hand on Selena's shoulder, then bent down to embrace both his children. That image was captured by reporters and appeared on news sites within hours, captioned, "A new family born from old loss." In that moment, every distance, every sorrow, every doubt dissolved, leaving only one thing: the first steps on a new journey, where love leads the way and justice walks hand in hand with compassion. Adrian stood at the edge of the stage, bright lights casting over his face, his eyes blurring as he watched Noah and Nora glowing with joy in Selena's arms. It had been so long since he'd seen his children so carefree, their smiles whole, untouched by fear or the shadow of the past. His heart clenched, and his voice came out thick but honest. "They have their smiles back." The words silenced those around him, because everyone understood children's laughter is the truest sign of healing, of love returning after the fall. Selena bent down, arms wrapped tightly around the kids, her gentle smile radiant like dawn. She didn't need applause or praise, only the clear eyes of Noah and Nora to know her journey hadn't been in vain. But it was that humility that made her image spread even wider. From festival videos, the press and online community began to call her a new symbol, a symbol of resilience, of boundless love. On social media, thousands of photos of Selena guiding the children through their mother's dance spread rapidly. Captions filled the feeds, simple yet powerful. "A new family born from love. Justice isn't only in courtrooms, but in this embrace." Single mothers, families who had lost loved ones, children raised in hardship, all found something to connect with. Selena became an inspiration, not for doing anything extraordinary, but for standing tall, for daring to give love even while still carrying her own wounds. Major newspapers published features calling her the woman who turned loss into strength, a mother without blood ties but with a full heart. On talk shows, sociologists discussed how Selena's presence reignited faith that family isn't only defined by blood, but by connection and compassion. Her name became tied to grassroots movements, encouraging many to rise up against injustice, to protect children and the vulnerable. Adrian watched it all, but what he valued most wasn't the headlines in the press. It was the change within his own family. Every morning, he saw his children laugh more, heard their playful voices echo through the house, and saw Selena become an irreplaceable part of their lives. The way he looked at her was no longer that of an employer to a nanny, but one of admiration and gratitude. He knew it was she who had given back to his family something priceless that money could never buy: laughter and peace. Within the community, Selena wasn't just a fleeting media story. She was invited to speak at schools, community centers, and places where her voice could carry. Every time she spoke, with eyes full of conviction, people felt her sincerity reach straight into their hearts. Children who had lost faith in adults now had someone to believe in, and parents found hope from pain. A new door could open. That evening after the festival, when the crowd had gone home, Adrian quietly watched Selena walk hand in hand with the children toward the brightly lit villa. He knew their journey was far from over, and there would be more challenges ahead. But from this moment on, Selena had become a guiding light, not only for his family, but for thousands of others out there. And within that ripple of hope, Adrian believed that the smiles once lost would be found again, time and time again. The sun set over the garden behind the Cole estate, the last light of day painting the sky in soft shades of orange and red, filtering through the leaves and casting a warm glow over the still surface of the lake. The quiet was so complete, even the distant chirp of birds returning to their nests, and the gentle breeze weaving through the trees, could be heard clearly. Adrian stood by the wooden railing, his eyes fixed on the horizon, but inside him, a storm churned. He had been through so much, once lost in grief, then slowly finding his way back thanks to Selena's presence. Now, with the sky bathed in the soft hues of dusk, he knew he could no longer remain silent. Selena stepped out from the porch, her long hair swaying gently in the breeze. She wore nothing elaborate, just a simple dress, yet her gaze shone brightly in the dimming light. Noah and Nora were playing inside, leaving this quiet moment for just the two of them. Selena paused a few steps behind, watching Adrian's tall figure framed in the sunset, then softly asked, "What are you thinking about?" Adrian turned, his eyes deep, his lips parting before he finally spoke the words he never thought he would dare to say. "I'm not looking to replace my wife." His voice was rough but firm. "I'm looking for the truth in my heart." The words rang out, simple yet powerful, tearing through the silence that had surrounded him for so long. Adrian was used to strength in the business world, but this was one of the rare times he exposed the rawest part of himself. He didn't want to compare or impose any role on Nana, because he knew that would be unfair. He simply wanted to admit that deep down, he had found a new sense of life through the feelings growing inside him for her. Selena stood still, her heart tightening at his words. Her eyes flickered, though her face remained calm. After a moment, she shook her head gently, her voice quiet but clear. "You and I, we're too different." The reply wasn't harsh, but it stood like a wall between two worlds. Selena understood that divide well. On one side, a powerful millionaire, used to the public eye and all its scrutiny. On the other, a woman of color, who had faced injustice and carved her path from pain. She feared that divide would never close, that no matter how genuine the feelings, the world would judge them, would question her motives, would see the relationship as a transaction rather than truth. Adrian stepped forward, his eyes locked on hers. "Difference doesn't scare me," he said, his voice lowering. "We've both lost, both stood at the edge. That's how I know you understand me more than anyone else ever could." Selena listened, her heart stirring with a wave of emotion. She wanted to believe him, but the hesitation still clung tightly. She didn't want this love to become a burden for him, and more than anything, she didn't want to be seen as someone using his status to gain a place that wasn't truly hers. The sky gradually turned purple, the golden light of dusk retreating to make way for nightfall. They both stood silently before the shifting landscape, neither saying another word. But in that silence, the words spoken could not be taken back. Selena gently turned away, walking toward the porch, her slender shoulders trembling slightly. Adrian remained still, his eyes following her silhouette as it disappeared. He didn't resent her rejection because he knew that true love wasn't about haste but about patience. Inside Selena, the conversation left a lingering emotion she couldn't quite name. She felt both warmth and fear. Warmth, because for the first time, someone truly saw her not through the lens of her skin or past, but through her courage and heart. But fear, because she knew that to hold on to such love, they would have to face a world full of judgment and scrutiny. Adrian returned to the living room to find Noah and Nora busy building a castle out of wooden blocks. They looked up and laughed, their innocent joy dissolving the gloom in his heart. He sat down to help them stack the blocks, though his eyes occasionally drifted toward the window where Selena had just passed. Inside him, a fire had been lit, and even in the face of difference, he had decided he would not let it go out. That evening closed with a heavy quiet between them. One had dared to admit their feelings, the other still feared the chasm between their worlds. Yet both Adrian and Selena knew that, after all the loss and hardship, this love, different as it may be, was slowly finding its way into existence. Adrian tilted his head slightly, his eyes on Selena, and a faint smile spread across his face, no longer tight with hesitation. His voice was low but warm, cutting through the quiet of the garden. Difference didn't stop those two kids from calling you Mom. The words struck like a clean break, shattering the last shell of doubt within Selena. It wasn't a grand promise, nor an excuse, but a simple truth, one already etched into the eyes and hearts of two children. Selena froze, her lips trembling, her hands clasping each other tighter. She hadn't expected him to say that, especially when she herself still hesitated hearing the word Mom slip from the children's mouths. For her, it was a mix of emotion and weighty responsibility, a joy laced with fear. But hearing Adrian say it out loud made her heart lighter. Because she understood, this wasn't about replacement, it was about continuation, the expansion of a family that once believed it had lost everything. Just then, from the porch, a burst of giggles echoed. Noah and Nora came running, their hair wild in the evening breeze, their eyes shining like stars. They threw themselves into Selena's arms, their small hands wrapping around her as their voices rang out with innocent delight. "We're a family now." That pure cry seemed to brighten the air, sweeping away the shadows and doubts the adults still wrestled with. Selena bent down, wrapping both children in her arms, tears spilling without warning. She had once believed life held only loss, had once thought herself unworthy of having a home. But now, the small arms around her, and the innocent voices had proved her wrong. A family wasn't necessarily born of blood, but of love, empathy, and trust. Her shoulders trembled, but this time not from pain, rather from a sense of wholeness she had never dared to dream of. Adrian stepped forward, kneeling beside them. He placed a hand on Selena's shoulder, a light touch full of meaning. In his eyes, the woman before him was no longer someone misunderstood and mistreated, but a steady anchor, a source of strength for him and his children. He no longer saw the distance of status or past, only a family growing right here in this moment. His heart, once closed off by grief, now open to something new and true. Noah looked up, eyes shining, and said innocently, "Dad, Miss Selena is our mom now, right?" Nora chimed in, her voice soft and sweet. "We have a family now." Adrian looked into their eyes, his chest tightening with emotion. He nodded, no words needed, because that silence spoke everything. Everything he had struggled with, doubted, was now washed away by the sound of children's laughter. Selena whispered, "You've given me a gift I'll carry for the rest of my life." The words weren't just for the children, but for Adrian as well. Because he had given her the chance to step into this home, not as someone hired, but as someone who truly belonged. In that moment, the four of them, once strangers, once broken, had found each other, and become a new kind of family. The last light of day turned the garden gold, the breeze rustling gently through the leaves. In that quiet scene, Noah and Nora's laughter echoed, blending with Adrian's soft sigh, and Selena's radiant smile through tears. It wasn't an ending, but a beginning. A family had just been formed, not by fate, but by love that reached beyond every difference. And in that sunset glow, Adrian, Selena, Noah, and Nora all knew they had stepped into a new chapter of life, one written with trust and true love. 1 year later, the city witnessed a momentous event that many had only dared to dream of. In the very neighborhood where Selena had once begun, the community center named Future Steps was officially inaugurated. The building was not lavish, but solid, with clear glass windows and a wide courtyard filled with sunlight. On a bronze plaque, the words read, "Built by the Cole Fund, for a just future for all children." On opening day, hundreds of locals gathered, many familiar faces from past protests, now smiling, carrying a renewed sense of hope. Adrian sat with Noah and Nora in the front row, his eyes quietly following Selena as she stepped up to the podium. Selena wore a simple dress, a stack of papers in hand, though she didn't need to read from them. Her voice rang out clearly. Future Steps is not just a place to learn music, it's a space where children learn to believe in themselves. I once lost someone I loved to injustice, but I won't let the next generation grow up in that same fear. From today, every child who walks through these doors will know that skin color doesn't define worth, but heart and hope do. Applause thundered through the crowd, and my eyes welled with tears. When the ceremony ended, the children rushed in, eyes bright with wonder at the new music rooms, gleaming white pianos, bookshelves stacked with children's stories and study materials. Selena moved among them, gently placing a hand on each shoulder, asking questions, offering encouragement. In her eyes, there was no trace of the pain she once carried, only conviction, a quiet fire telling each child they were worthy of love and a future. Adrian watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. He knew the fund he had provided wasn't just an act of redemption, but a doorway through which Selena could fulfill what she had always longed for. Noah and Nora darted about, happily telling their new friends, "This is the place our mom Selena built for us." That innocent declaration stood as proof that his family was now truly whole, and love had extended beyond the bounds of blood. In the months that followed, the Future Steps Center became a beloved hub. Many children of color touched instruments for the first time, and tiny voices filled the warm acoustic rooms with song. Selena guided them with care, sometimes sitting for hours beside a shy boy to teach each piano key, or holding a little girl trembling with a violin in her hands. Each of those moments was captured by the community, shared across social media, turning Selena into a symbol of hope and resilience. One evening, as the lights in the center gradually dimmed, Selena sat alone, listening to the fading echoes of the children's music lessons. Adrian walked in, holding a coat for her, and softly said, "You turned the impossible into reality." Selena smiled, her eyes gentle. "No, we did it together. But more importantly, these children will be the ones to continue the story." He didn't respond, only gave her shoulder a light squeeze, his heart filling with the peace he had long been searching for. Future Steps was not just a center, but a reminder to the entire city that justice doesn't end in a courtroom, it must be cultivated daily in life. Selena, once mocked and dismissed, had become a guide, not just for Noah and Nora, but for hundreds of other children. The final message she left behind needed no grand slogans. It lived in the eyes of every child who walked out those doors, eyes filled with confidence, freedom, and hope. In the last light of day, the sound of a piano rose from the center's main room, a simple yet lively melody. Selena stood by the window, watching the children playing outside, a soft smile on her lips. Adrian stood behind her, both children clinging to his arms, the three of them quietly watching. Their family, like the center itself, had moved through loss to find light. And in that moment, it was clear to all that Future Steps was not only built for today, but for the thousands of steps still to come, steps toward justice and compassion. Noah and Nora grew up in a home filled with laughter, where the shadows of the past were replaced by the light of love. The cracks in their hearts slowly healed, leaving behind the confidence and empathy they learned from Selena. To them, the woman who once entered the house just to help them sleep through their grief had become a true role model, a real mother. When they called Selena Mom, they no longer confused the memory of their late mother with the present, because they understood that family could be built through love, not just blood. They grew up under her guidance, learning to respect differences, to see people with their hearts instead of appearances. Selena watched their journey, from music lessons at the community center to the day they stepped onto their college campuses, determined to use their voices to help shape society. In every success, they never forgot the warm arms that had carried them through childhood, never forgot the nights she sat reading beside their beds to chase away nightmares. To Noah and Nora, calling Selena Mom wasn't a habit, it was a declaration that a true family is where the heart is protected and nurtured. Adrian, once a cold man after tragedy, also changed through that journey. He watched his children grow, saw them learn to share, to be brave, and to believe in justice. Looking at Selena, he realized it was she who had taught both him and the children that true strength doesn't lie in wealth or power, but in the ability to reach someone's heart. Adrian was no longer a solitary millionaire, but a father who rediscovered the meaning of life in seeing his family truly happy. At the one-year anniversary celebration of the Future Steps Center, hundreds gathered in the brightly lit hall. Adrian stood at the wooden podium, the spotlight casting over his calm yet emotional face. He looked to the front row, where Noah and Nora sat beside Selena, their eyes shining with pride. He took a deep breath and began to speak, each word echoing like a message to everyone. True power is not in wealth, but in having the courage to stand up for love and justice. That speech was quoted across the media, becoming a widely shared phrase on social media. People no longer spoke of Adrian Cole merely as a wealthy businessman, but as a father, a man who dared to admit his mistakes and choose the right path. Thousands of families, upon reading or hearing those words, found renewed faith that love can always be reborn, that justice is never too distant a dream if one has the courage to stand up. Selena quietly watched Adrian from afar, a deep, indescribable emotion rising in her heart. She knew their journey had never been easy, but this moment proved that none of their efforts had been in vain. Noah and Nora held her hands, calling Mom with radiant smiles, as if underlining the story they had written together. It was the story of a family reborn from brokenness, of love that transcended color and status. And from that home, the final message rang out. The greatest power a person can hold is to protect one another, so that love and justice always walk side by side. Looking back on the entire journey, people saw that the story of Adrian Cole, Selena Brooks, and the two children, Noah and Nora, was not just a personal path, but a reflection of values far beyond their family. Adrian, a millionaire once buried in the shadow of grief after losing his wife, began the story closed off and full of doubt, even toward the woman brought in to care for his children. Selena, who entered that house with bare hands and a heart full of wounds, became the first to bring light. From nights of singing lullabies in the midst of doubt to moments of standing up to injustice, She proved that courage needs no title, only a heart that knows how to stand tall. That journey gradually revealed the dark corners of society, as Grant and Doyle, two corrupt police officers, emerged as symbols of moral decay in uniform. They inflicted pain not only on Selena but on many other innocent families. Yet, if outrage alone were the driving force, the story wouldn't have gone far. What truly moved people was how Selena and Adrian chose to face it. With no vengeance, no retreat, they brought the truth into the light, from Noah's accidental recording to financial records, exposing a protection racket. Step by step, justice was awakened not through power, but through the resolve of ordinary people, brave enough to speak out. At the same time, the relationship between Adrian and Selena stood as proof that differences are not barriers, but can become bridges when the heart is placed above prejudice. Adrian didn't see Selena as a replacement for his late wife. He found in her the truth within himself, that he needed a companion who understood him and loved his children with genuine care. Selena, despite her hesitation, slowly opened the door to trust, not because Adrian was wealthy, but because he chose to abandon silence and stand up for what's right. Noah and Nora, through it all, became a sacred bond, as the word mom slipped from their lips, carrying the message that family is not just built by blood, but by choice and love. The establishment of the Future Steps Center was the culmination of that entire journey. From the small classroom where Selena had once been dragged away mid-Lasanto, a vibrant building filled with children's laughter, it stood as a clear symbol that justice and compassion can truly bring change. Future Steps didn't belong to Adrian or Selena alone, it belonged to every child ever pushed to the margins, a place where every small step could lead to renewed belief. There, Selena was not only a mother to Noah and Nora, but to hundreds of other children, souls needing a hand to lift them up. The greatest lesson from this story is the power of love and courage. Justice will not come on its own unless someone dares to stand up, and love will never be strong enough if it exists only in words. Selena teaches us that a woman, even after loss and judgment, can turn pain into strength to change her community. Adrian teaches us that true power doesn't lie in numbers on a bank statement, but in the choice to stand for what's right, even at the cost of reputation. And Noah and Nora, with the innocence of children, remind everyone that an honest call from the heart can heal even the deepest wound. When Adrian said, "True power isn't money, it's the courage to stand up for love and justice," he wasn't just speaking to his own family, but to thousands of others searching for faith. That statement was an ending, but also the beginning of a longer journey, where Future Steps would continue to open its doors, where children would keep walking forward with steady feet. And every time music echoed from that bright classroom, people would remember the final message this story left behind. Even in a world full of divisions, as long as love remains, justice will always find a way to be heard.